close my back curtains because the light comes streaming in and it just sort of blooms. So, listen, I'm just happy to get on a Zoom call and not have major issues, which is normally how I operate. You know that.
Oh yeah, unfortunately I do.
It's great fun.
But it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Good morning.
I mean, it's nice to see you too as well, Christian and Ken, but you weren't talking.
Hey guys. This is way up there.
Good morning.
Hey, Christian. We are missing a commissioner.
Carrie might know if she's having trouble.
I know I had trouble because it wouldn't take my email address, so I don't know what that's about. Oh, she says she needs to be let in. There we go. Okay, all righty. Everybody is present and accounted for. Well, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. At this time, before we begin our formal informal session, we are going to have a special session of the local contract review board. So before we get into the specifics of our formal session, and Commissioner Kula, I believe you were the only one at the time who was there because Commissioner Olson was there. I was not there, but you were there. So when it comes to approving the minutes, I think you might be it. So at this time, I'll open the local contract review board special meeting for February 25th, 2021. It's Thursday, and on our agenda is the consideration of approval of the minutes. So Commissioner Kula, would you like to make that motion?
Well, thank you, Chair. I would move that we approve the minutes of the local contract review board.
Thank you so much. We have a motion to approve. Any further discussion? I don't know that we can vote on that. So Commissioner Kula, would that procedurally be Commissioner Kula voting on that, or do we all vote on it?
Sorry, Madam Chair, you said you weren't in attendance at that meeting, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, then I mean, if you're not intending to vote because you weren't there, then I don't think you've got a quorum to vote to approve the minutes.
So what do we do? Do we just call up Commissioner Olson and haul him back in here for a vote?
He can't vote.
Yeah, well, it's true. He can't. We're kind of stuck, aren't we?
Wasn't there a moment when Commissioner Bershauer voted to approve something recently, but you weren't there at this meeting? Do you remember, Commissioner Bershauer?
All right. So, Christian, this is a question for you regarding a vote on the minutes. I think at one point you said that we could vote on the minutes, but I just want to be sure.
I am double checking. What we can probably do, as you can see, these minutes are from a meeting a couple of years ago. If we weren't to approve these minutes at this meeting, we could probably approve them at the next LCRB meeting. And in the meantime, I'll take a look at the procedure and make sure that we're doing it correctly.
Thank you very much. All right,
Yeah.
so we'll move on to, thank you, Christian, on to item 2, which is consideration of authorizing an exemption from competitive bidding for a sole source procurement under ORS 279B.075 to purchase material for a railroad crossing on Bridewell Road in the amount of $29,378.20. Do we have a motion? Or is Mark Lago, Public Works Director, is here? Mark, did you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. So basically, what we have before you is actually asking for a sole source. This is one of those roads that is going to be on our capital improvement projects. We're just trying to get the panels within that railway track. We actually called the railway company, and they're willing to, we pay for all the material, actually install these concrete panels you might see if you're going across railroad tracks. It creates a very smooth transition from the asphalt to the concrete, through the rails and to the other side. If you don't put this concrete in there, you develop a little bit of rolls between the tracks. You're not going to get a really good seam there, and potholes and all that is created. So we're trying to think ahead and actually get this done prior to us doing our overlay. So that's why the request there of a sole source through the railroad company.
All right, thank you, Mark. Does anybody have any questions? And do we have a motion to consider the authorizing of that exemption?
Chair, I thank you, Director Lago. I thought Director Lago's explanation in the agenda packet was excellent. It gave me a real clear sense of why this is necessary. So with that, I would move that we authorize.
Okay, we
I
have a
should look at the, let me switch back to the language to get it right, if you don't mind. Okay, I move that we authorize an exemption from competitive bidding for a sole source procurement under ORS 279B.075 to purchase material for a railroad crossing on Bridewell Road in the amount of $29,378.20.
Okay, we have a motion to approve, and Director Lago, thank you for that explanation and what you provided to us prior to this. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Other business as necessary? Oh, Ken and Christian.
Well, I was just going to say that that there's a couple steps to the process. The first part is the local contract review board authorize the exemption from competitive bidding, and then you will see this come forward again for the board to take action to actually approve the quote or the contract. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that there's two steps to this process because the amount of the contract is over my signature authority. So it'll be coming back before the board.
By $4,378.20.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
one of the items. The other item is 26,000, I think, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, I don't have that. Is there another? I don't have that item.
23,000. That's the Omega Industries concrete. It should be in the packet.
Okay,
Christian, I think the chair was making a bit of a joke about the expense authority or the signature authority, not about the two separate things, which was the seals and then the concrete.
see, when you have to have your jokes explained, it's really bad. They're really bad jokes.
I'm too deep into Robert's rules, but I think I have an answer for you on your minutes question.
Oh, okay. So do we want to go back to the minutes question? Christian?
Yeah, so a member's absence from a meeting for which minutes are being approved does not prevent the member from participating in their correction or approval. So even if you weren't there, you can vote on the approval of the minutes.
All right, thank you very much. So let's go back to item 1, which is the consideration of the approval of the minutes from September 3rd, 2019. And we have a motion from Commissioner Kula to approve. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. Now, did you mention there was another item? I don't have another item on this agenda?
No, I was simply referring to the two different items that were in Mark's request.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay,
Sorry for that.
all righty. So is there any other business as necessary? All right, hearing none, then we'll go ahead and adjourn the special session of the Local Contract Review Board. And thank you, Director Lago. We'll move on at this time to open the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for February 25th, 2021. And at this time, we'll have our flag salute. And Mr. Huffer, would you lead us in the pledge?
Sure.
I
Pledge
pledge allegiance to the
flag
flag
of the United
United
States
States of America,
and to the
and to the
republic
republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Next is the calendaring session. Do we have anything that we wanted to add to our regular calendar session, commissioners? Anything come to mind?
I don't have anything, Chair.
Okay, we do have AOC. No, we don't. We've got another week before AOC. So, all right, we'll move on to item D, which is public comment. And much to the overwhelm of our staff, we received, I'm going to say at this point, over 900, maybe approaching 1,000 emails regarding one of our agenda items, the Second Amendment Sanctuary Ordinance. And we did have a constituent who asked that we keep track of the numbers, opponents and proponents. And I would say at this time, we can either go into that or perhaps somebody can bring it up during that agenda item. So in any event, we'll move on to our work session. We have none. Department updates, we have none. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
All right, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to old business, item H, which is consideration of submitting a letter of support for the Community Paths Grant Bypass Trail and Hess Creek Bridge, which is continued from February 18th, which was continued from the week before that. And we very much appreciate CPRD's bearing with us as we plow through the information. And Kat Ricker joins us. Casey is there. Anyway, thank you for joining us. And Kat, thank you for providing the information that you did. There's a Superintendent Clemens is there. Thank you for providing the information, and we appreciate your graciousness in addressing our questions. So when last we met and discussed this, we had a couple of questions about the funding mechanism for this. And I'm just wondering if we could go back and just sort of get a look at how the match is, how you're proposing coming up with the match.
Commissioner, we are proposing to fund the match through our SDCs and our funds from general taxes. We are looking for partners for that, but at this point, we're committed to that $762,000 as for right now. We're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the questions that I had regarding the, we did see an increase in the SDCs. And, you know, again, that's always been a sort of a significant area for me when we talk about affordable housing, if government is not willing to also be part of the solution for affordable housing. So the increase in CPRD's system development charges will be increasing in July. And I guess I just have a concern about using SDCs and these increases to fund yet another project when your reserves are healthy, your beginning balance is healthy, and now we have an increase and a new project. So that's just kind of where I land on this. Commissioner Kula.
Yeah, along those lines, I just clarification. Systems development charges aren't those for building new infrastructure? So that's like a tag on to Chair Sterrett's question.
That's correct. That is the purpose of SDC funds.
Yes, and I guess to my point is that if we have to increase our SDC fees, for instance, adding on to a single-family home in Newberg, almost $8,000, add that to the $34,000 system development charges in Newberg, and before you put a shovel in the ground, it's 40 grand. And I know we struggle with affordable housing, and I think it would be nice to have all these projects, but if we have to add so much to the cost of a house, that's where I struggle with this, but that's just my personal opinion. Commissioners, did you have any other questions about this project? Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the CPRD team. One of the frustrations, and this is not unique to Newburgh, but one of the frustrations around this topic of affordable housing is that everyone seems to be very siloed in what they're doing and what they're pursuing, and they don't realize that the impact is that you're making housing less affordable. And that's been, years long criticism. But my question is, the next item on the agenda is the vertical housing development zone, which you guys are an overlying tax district for. So when you start considering those kinds of projects, in addition to the Waterfront urban renewal zone that's being proposed, how are you going to mitigate some of that impact? Because it will pull revenue away from CPRD. And when you're talking about taking on large projects, there's a concern going forward of, maintain and sustain without further increases to SDC fees.
Our SDC fees were put in place, 20 years ago, Don?
Right,
And
roughly.
for 18 of those 20 years, they were not increased at all. And so the last time we increased them, we increased them with the understanding that they were going to increase according to the Portland Construction Index. And the first couple years they went up so a little bit more than our board would have liked probably. But I think this year it was like 0.001 something. So it wasn't.
It was 0.0094.
Yeah. So it wasn't a substantial increase. But we've always felt that, we develop all these parks and neighborhoods that benefit the community of Newburgh. That's what this trail's for. This is going to help those people in a socially impacted area get to Fred Meyer, get to the hospital, get to the PCC, get up into the community without having to go down 99. And there's not really a trail system or sidewalk system that's actually good for that.
We didn't, the legislature was addressed some years ago with the idea, who pays when a community grows, who pays for it? Do the people that live there pay for it? Or do the new people moving in pay for it? That was debated, discussed. That's where the SDCs came into effect. There was methodology that was developed for the SDCs that is constantly being upgraded and has been over all these years. New rules and regulations come in, which every governmental agency has to apply. So the question is when new communities grow, who pays for it? And it was decided at that time that SDCs would be established to help with that growth, because it was not fair, according to the legislature, for the people that live there to pay for all of that. The impact was coming in. So the SDCs were established. Whether it was right or wrong is not for us to decide. There was a mechanism established by which we could then fund new development and new projects that go on in communities because of the growth. So the methodology of SDCs is explained around that. Each governmental agency then sets the projects that they feel will result from that growth. So I hope that helps you understand. Our SDCs were one of the first, and we kind of was unique because we had to have the county collect the SDCs, and each two cities in our district can collect the SDCs. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of history.
Thank you for that, Chair. I have a couple of follow-up questions, if I can.
Go ahead.
So how many parks and projects, if you will, do you guys have currently? I know the Aquatic Center is part of that, correct?
Correct.
The Aquatic Center is based on the bond that was passed. So the Aquatic Center is not part of those SDCs because we passed a bond for that. And there are other projects. As a matter of fact, during the public hearing, there was a lot of comments about the project cost and what those were and vice versa. That is set by the board of directors who are elected by the community.
Okay, so besides the Aquatic Center, how many parks and projects do you have in and around Newburgh?
We probably have, Casey, do you know off the top of your head?
28 parks, about 1,200 acres of open space, land, trails. That's being slowly developed as we have the funds to do that.
Okay, so is there a potential to do a bond for this particular trail?
That is correct. There would be a potential for a bond if the community so desires it or the elected officials put it forth. There has been talk in the community about that. The bond issue would be very small. We're talking about pennies, but there has been some discussion about that.
Okay, and then I was once a member of the Aquatic Center. The Aquatic Center is set up where you have to be a member, right? You have to pay dues and you have to be a member to attend or access it.
Well, that's not correct. That's only partially correct. We do have a membership base. We also have day fees, and you can attend from out of the district. You can actually attend from out of the state, out of the country if you like, and you'll just pay our day fee, which is slightly higher than our membership in district fee.
Right. So, but taxpayers essentially are paying twice, right? Because they paid for the bond and they're paying for an access fee in order to access it to come in.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my concern is just, going forward, when you take on these big projects like the Aquatic Center's an example, it's not necessarily similar to a trail, but the cost of maintaining that do go up. I believe my dues went up for the Aquatic Center while I was there in a very short period of time. So there's an impact to the community in terms of taxing levels. And I think I'm curious to see if you guys are planning to opt out of the vertical housing zone because it would impact your tax revenue. I don't think you can opt out of the urban renewal one, but if that comes forward, but is that something that is being discussed on your?
Well, thank you. That's on our board of directors agenda for this evening's meeting, and the board will be addressing that. That has not been addressed by the board to date.
Okay. I guess my other concern is that when I was looking at the map of the trail, it seems like what is being sold is that we're going to have a connection from Dundee to essentially past Fred Meyer, and that's not really what the first segment does. The first segment is primarily that very large bridge. And so I want to make sure that you guys don't, and we said this at the last meeting, but you guys don't run into the same problem that we had with the Yamhill West Sider Trail, where most of the money was concentrated on a single bridge or piece of the overall project. And then, the public thinks that they're getting the whole enchilada and really they're not. So, I'm hesitant. I think at the last meeting, Kat, you said that you're not necessarily seeking a formal letter from the board for this particular project, but I do have quite a bit of hesitancy around it.
Thank you. The bridge is a substantial portion of phase one. We appreciate your point about clarification and outreach, and we'll continue to strive to make everything clear of the points of those. We can't control the cost of the bridge. It is a substantial bridge. But once in place, then the rest of the project can move forward much more straightforwardly.
The current plan is valued at roughly $88 million if we were to complete it. But that will be updated, of course, on annuals as the cost goes up and vice versa. But that was for 50-something miles of trails and bridges and those type things. But that will be done probably over the next 100 years.
We would appreciate a letter to clarify. We have already submitted our letters as required by the application, but if you were gracious to grant us a letter, we would certainly submit that and hope that ODOT might accept that as well, even though our application has been completed.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Superintendent, you mentioned that methodology report, system development charge methodology report, which would have your reasons for it being so high. And I'm just wondering, because back in 2003, the SDC for one house, a single family dwelling, was about $1,400. So why has it increased beyond that rate? I mean, I'm not sure how that factors into the methodology that you said was in place at the time this SDC fee was increased.
Over the years, the methodology for SDCs has changed. The first go around, it was done by the level of service. And then there was a lot of objections across the state. There was new policies put in. And we had to then decide what projects we had and vice versa, because there was a lot of debate about that. So we're trying to meet the law as defined by the state of Oregon. And to do that, you go out and you hire consultants who come in and they work with you to establish those figures and all of that information that goes out. Then when you do all that, you then go out to the public and you have public hearings and you do those type things by which to establish the fee, and then the board sets the fee.
So I'm wondering if you actually have a systems that systems development charge methodology report that you use as the basis for these increases?
Yes, that's posted on our website.
Okay. The other question I had, and this goes back to, again, sorry to be harping on the systems development charges, but it is a significant portion of a cost of building a house in Newberg, is that I was at a meeting and a member of the school board, a former teacher and coach in Newberg, came to the meeting and said, listen, I'm concerned about the condition of the parks. I'm concerned about the condition of the golf course. It seems that there's a lot of maintenance that has been deferred, and yet you're asking for an increase in SDCs. So in other words, for increasing infrastructure, for expanding infrastructure, and yet the current projects are either undeveloped or poorly maintained. And I know that those concerns continue because we hear about them occasionally. And I was just wondering if you were to take on another project like a multi-million-dollar project and you have deferred maintenance on the existing projects, it's sort of like building an addition onto your house when the roof is falling in. And I was just wondering how that factors into the decision to enter into this project.
I think there's always a concern, of course, development sometimes in operation is very important. Actually, the SDC charges across the state of Oregon, we're probably somewhere in the middle of the SDCs across the state. There's many agencies way above us. And that was presented during all the hearings. As far as the tax base and stuff, our current tax base is 90 cents per thousand. If you go across the state, I think you'd find that would definitely be on the lower end. It would be somewhat in the middle, but on the lower end. There's many agencies that have tax bases of $2 and something. Some of them, most of them have at least $1 or higher. So, but that is set by the community. And in doing so, our job here is to try to maintain what we have. And again, there's always opinions about what should be maintained and what not. But I feel that we do a pretty fair job in our repair and replacement. And constantly over the years, I've told the board, repair and replacement is extremely important. You can outstrip your repair and replacement options in your budget. But that's not only our agency. I think the county of Yamhill is probably facing the same situation as any government agency is.
Yes, and the only thing I would add to that, Superintendent, is that our tax rate has remained steady and static for decades. And but in any event, I don't want to belabor that. I did have one more question again about in the application for this, the ODOT application. I would like to see some remediation done to acknowledge the fact that there were concerns, that there were opponents, there were concerns from people who were worried about eminent domain, who were worried about impacts to agricultural land, and those were not noted. And I find that is kind of what we came up against with the trail that we just had to put an end to. I just don't want to see another project that we're signing on to. I'm not at this point convinced that this is I mean, just the application alone has a bunch of red flags. So that's why I know, Commissioner Kula, that you signed on to a letter of support. I know you don't need a letter of support. I do think this has been an important exercise for us to get this information and just to raise some of these concerns. but I don't know if we need an action from the board or perhaps a motion to consider a full board support letter. I will leave that up to Commissioner Kula. Do you feel we should take a vote for that, or procedurally, Christian, is that something we need to vote on, or can we just consider it a discussion item?
I heard,
Yeah,
I heard Christian, but
Yeah, I mean, if the board wants to take action and have a formal vote on the record, one way or the other, you can certainly do that, or you can choose not to take any action.
Commissioner Bershauer, do you have a preference?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with some of your concerns. I also think that I would add that in the application, there is an assumption, and I believe there was a letter of support from the Hellas, Friends of the Hellas West Sider Trail. And so I'm concerned that there's an assumption made in the grant application that this trail would eventually connect to the Hellas Trail, which is, like Chair Starrett said, something we have pulled back. So I would not be willing to sign a letter of support at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. So Commissioner Kula, you have submitted a letter of support, and any comments as far as letting that stand and moving on and not taking an actual formal vote on this request?
yeah, I mean, I think that at this point, there's not a sense of urgency. This application is already at the state. I've submitted, testimony in favor of it. I think that when additional sections, as they're proposed to be developed, come up, I'd like to see CPRD reach out to us again, as much just to keep us apprised of what's happening. While I understand the real value of having this first section, this first phase, getting started, connecting it to the city of Dundee. So the city of Dundee is connected to the waterfront, at Rogers Landing, and connected to the commercial centers in the city of Newberg, to me is a good long-term vision.
I agree. Well, I want to thank you, Superintendent and Casey and Kat, for joining us and bearing with us. I do hope you'll keep us posted on your decision on the vertical housing opt-in and also, or opt-out, and also keep us posted on the progress of this grant and let us know what's going on so we can share that information with the rest of the county. And as I said earlier, this is a trail project that does make sense, and I appreciate that you've used existing bypass infrastructure. And so I would love to be able to support it, and I would maybe at some point even use this trail, and I know others would as well, but I do have some concerns about the way the application was submitted. So thank you for bearing with us, for coming back for 3 separate weeks, and I hope you'll keep us posted on what goes on forthcoming.
We certainly will. We appreciate your interest, and we appreciate those comments of support, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you very much.
I would also like to add, for the commissioner's information, the Salem Future Focus, which has been since the 80s, the county and city administrators, we all meet on a monthly basis. So we keep sharing information about projects such as this and stuff every month. And the county is part of that. And we share that information on a monthly basis. And you're always invited to attend. We'd love to have you. We meet the first Tuesday of every month, and we meet at 8:30 in the morning. And that's all the City of Dundee, City of Newburgh, TVFNR,
PCC,
the Portland Community College, the County of Yamhill,
Newberg School District.
All the governing agencies in our area. And we've been doing that since the 80s, by which to share and work together. And I think it's paid off for this community, and we'll continue to do that.
Carrie Martin is your representative there. She's been attending for some time, and we have discussed this trail as well as the Yamhalis with Carrie through that group for some time. And I've just issued the Zoom invitation for next Tuesday. I would be more than happy to put you on that list.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks so much. Thank you all. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk soon. So let's move on to item H2, which is the consideration of a resolution formally stating an opt-in, opt-out decision regarding the City of Newburgh's vertical housing development zone. We continued this also from last week, and as I said last time, where I come from, vertical housing is called apartment buildings, but it's a new spin on an old concept. So thank you, Keith Leonard, joining us from the City of Newberg, and our tax assessor and tax collector, Derek Wharf. And Patrick Davenport is joining us from the City of Newberg. Thank you so much. And I appreciate our assessor and our tax collector, Derek Wharf, explaining how this would work, impact the county, not only in terms of administrative costs, but just what it would, if we were to opt in, what it would cost us, and would it be significant. So I'll open up the discussion, and do we have commissioners who have questions about the City of Newberg and who we know so far has opted in and opted out?
Be the question for the City of Newberg rather than us.
Yes.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak with the commissioners. At this point, TVF&R has opted in. They're very aware of this program in the Portland metro area, which is widely supported. Beaverton, Tigard, Oregon City, it's a supported program. Mostly because this is a program that is trying to urge new development. It doesn't affect the existing taxes that are being collected by the jurisdictions. This is a little bit of an incentive to get a development built where there isn't a development currently built. So it's not a cure-all to get things built. And as you've noted, the SDCs are high in this area, but it's partial tax exemption. It's totally intended just to get more economic benefit to taxing jurisdictions, including a first floor commercial which would be fully taxed. And this percentage is only 20% for one single floor residential. The rest is fully taxed. So this is a small piece of the puzzle to kind of help us get more life in the downtown area, bring more people down to support the businesses which are really hurting. So that's kind of my spiel, especially after hearing the concerns with SDCs, which I live here in the City of Newberg. I'm well aware of these SDCs. And again, this is a partial tax, temporary tax abatement, nothing that's going to outlive the usefulness of the program. It's to get something built in the downtown area where it's not easy. And there's only about 14 spots, places where they could potentially having it. And there's a sliding scale. Not all those are great. So there's probably more like about 5 locations that really are probably more prime for development. And this is something that we're really hoping that the taxing jurisdictions will see the long-term benefit. I mean, just on a 2-story building, you're talking, if you had a building that's $1.6 million in value. For years 1 through 10, the abatement period, Yamhill County would still receive over $33,000 in taxes. The abatement amount would only be $6,799. So it's that very big sliding scale where 20% is not a huge incentive. It's not going to make a developer decide that they're going to go ahead and do it. But it's just something to kind of get them going in that direction so we can have a better downtown. So sorry about my long spiel, but I sat there and listened to the concern about the SDCs, and none of the taxing, what people are getting now, the jurisdictions, they're going to continue to get that amount. That's not going to be impacted.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. A question, you mentioned Portland and you mentioned Beaverton. We're inquiring about the jurisdictions that have opted in within Yamhill County or within your area there.
Yeah, I think Yamhill County, I'm not aware of anybody within Yamhill County at this point. I think McMinnville was looking at it, but you're looking at Oregon City, you're looking at the city of Tigard, you're looking at Beaverton. Wilsonville is now working on getting one established. And I don't have the complete list, but the majority of the taxing jurisdictions, there's a whole work group within the Portland metro area that meet quarterly and discuss the ups and downs and how the program's going. So it's there. It's present in the Portland metro area.
I'm not concerned. Well, I am concerned about the Portland metro area. I would like the Portland metro area to stay there, actually. What I'm concerned about is what jurisdictions, what taxing districts within your taxing purview have opted in.
At this point, only TVF&R. In fact, this is the first board that has, or the board of commissioners that have gotten together to make the decision here. So at this point, it's only TVF&R, and that's what I know.
Thank you. Commissioner Berschauer?
Thank you, Chair. And this might be a question for Derek, but does there have to be a definitive yes or no one way or the other, or is there kind of a default position?
Yeah, there has to be a definitive.
Okay.
I will change my administration of the district depending on the opt-in, opt-out. And one other thing I wanted to clarify, Mr. Leonard, thanks for your summary of the program, but it is a 20% exemption per floor, not overall. So if the floors go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, that exemption compounds. I did share last week, if you were here, that I am in concert that the abatement is maybe not as important in terms of the decision to consider as is the policy of, sort of mitigating SDC charges by an exemption program to spur development. I would still hold to that I don't know that it's a dollar impact so significant that I would be cautioning the decision based around that.
Thank you, Derek.
I would like to add that first floor commercial is fully taxed. There's no abatement on the first floor commercial.
Yeah, and it's currently fully taxed. You made a point about this is a go forward initiative. The existing underlying property tax that's being collected today, that's being levied today, would not be affected. This is new construction under the program in the zone. The existing property tax base would be unchanged, other than how we change it annually based on trends and other market data. So it's a go forward.
And then Mr. Leonard, is there a height restriction in Newberg in this zone? Does that change inside of the zone? How does that work?
Yeah, so our building height, actually within the city of Newburgh, we have no height restrictions, but what restricts the height is the airport. So there's these various surfaces, a conical surface, the airport approach surface. These areas have a way of shrinking down the buildings. But at this point, the city of Newburgh doesn't have a height restriction. It's strictly restricted on the airport. That being said, I think the tallest building we have is for residential is right downtown. It's a new building off of 2nd Street in Edwards. As far as something that's similar, there is one commercial use, and that is only a I believe three-story building, I believe, with just one residential, like a work study or a work live unit on the first floor.
Okay, so realistically, we're not going to get 5-6-story buildings because of
I would be very surprised. Not only that, I think there would be a huge stigma associated with that. You have residents who have lived in this city for a long time, and the idea of having a 75 75-story building, just, you know, I would be really surprised if we get a 4. You might get a 1, 2, or 3. But I can't, at this point, I can't imagine having like a 5-story building come in.
So I guess I'm kind of, Chair, if I might, I'm kind of wondering then how much of a carrot this is for a developer, because they're going to bear the brunt of the SDC fees, and this does nothing to mitigate that. And, you know, if you're talking about a fairly restricted height level, just based on where it is, you know, you're not talking about very much in tax abatement. So I'm kind of going back to, is it really that much of a carrot? And, you know, the second thing is I lived in Wilsonville, so I've lived in those zones, and there was nothing affordable about the housing that was built above these commercial first floor buildings. I mean, we're talking extremely unaffordable and really not family friendly in general. But so I guess I'm just sort of seeing, I'm kind of trying to identify what the problem is. And if there's multiple problems in Newberg, how is this actually solving anything? And then is there a time, I thought there was a time limit on us opting in or out. And is it concerning that there's so many taxing districts that have not considered this yet?
Yeah, so the opting in and opting out timing is specifically tied to receipt of the opt-in, opt-out letter. So from that point, we shadowed the letter. We sent out one in compliance with the ORS, which says you send it out regular mail. So that leaves the question, how do you realize when people have gotten the letter? So we shadowed it. There is an affordability aspect of the program, but that would be certified affordable housing, annually checked to make sure it's still it's still affordable. And then that abatement would be for the land. And I can tell you that my conversations with the taxing jurisdictions, in all honesty, they have not seen the affordability part of the program acted on. Developers are primarily driven by what pencils out. So they're driven by the number. There are some good ones out there that care about affordable housing, and I sure wish we could get them here in Newberg, because as somebody from Michigan, the sticker price on housing and rent is just mind-boggling. So I do understand your concern with affordable housing, and we're doing what we can. Patrick might have something to add. There is another program that could apply to these developments. Patrick?
Hi, thank you. Hope you can hear me through the mask. I'm sorry, my glasses are fogging up. I'll do my best. So we realize this is a small carrot, Commissioner. However, to make this program successful, it's going to take multiple carrots, such as this one. And our urban renewal program is also going to have to help with infrastructure cost and other development costs for a project like this, and other programs that may come from the federal and state programs. So it is going to take quite a significant toolbox to make this happen. So each one of these programs is by itself, I would agree, may not be enough incentive, but combined together, it will help further incentivize this, especially if they are formal affordable housing, of which now we have an construction excise tax to support formal affordable housing. So if these are formal affordable housing units that would be constructed, that's another funding source. So it will take a whole basket of incentives to make this happen. So I do hear you on that concern.
Thank you. Mr. Wharf?
Yeah, and just to bring it full circle to our discussion last week, all of the estimates that were proposed in the documentation we received to Mr. Leonard's point did not include a low-income housing component, which would change the exemption from 20% per floor to a land exemption underneath. So, you know, you may get some of what you're looking for, Lindsay, in terms of potential for low-income housing. just so you're aware, that would come with another tax abatement for that, for the land component if it were to go down that path. The models that were sent to us did not include any certified low-income housing.
Thank you very much. I wanted to, so as far as Newberg's SDCs, I mentioned earlier that the costs of the SDCs for Newberg, for instance, were $34,000 compared to, and Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, compared to $9,000 in McMinnville. So there's a significant difference. Is that correct? Roughly?
It's roughly, yeah, that's right.
Okay, so you're looking at 3 times the cost of SDCs in Newberg as opposed to McMinnville. How is the city of Newberg planning on, or are they planning on mitigating those SDCs going into this project?
The bulk of the complaints I hear about single family residential homes, residential aspects are that's developers do complain about that. I'm not sure that it's going to have a huge impact. I mean, Patrick, could you add anything?
So as you know, we don't have any control over what the parks SDCs are. I know that was on a previous discussion. We're very well aware of those costs that are outside our control. So the transportation, water, and sewer are the ones that are in our control. And those are based on our infrastructure projects planned for the future that City Council sets. And I know that City Council is very aware of the concerns for that. And the fees are going to be, I'm not sure if they're going to be lowered. So if they are going to be lowered, that means projects will have to be taken off the books. So I'm not aware of any programs out there that would allow waivers or reductions to SDCs unless you're in an urban renewal program, which urban renewal funds may help with that. And of course, this is in our urban renewal district. So urban renewal funds could help pay for development charges. So that's a one toolbox, using one tool to help sharpen another one. That metaphorically is possible.
Thank you. Just sort of for my own edification, can you explain the difference, or in other words, why McMinnville's SDCs are $9,000 and Newberg's are $34,000, and that's not including CPRD, which brings it over 40 grand for to get a project going in terms of a single family?
Yes, I'm not aware of McMinnville's methodology, but it could be that they have fewer projects on your capital improvements program. That would be a portion of that calculation to come up with your SDC fees. So I'm not familiar with McMinnville's capital improvement plans, but that would be my first assumption, that they have fewer projects, or the total cost of those future projects are less than ours.
Thank you. I know that was probably an unfair question. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's okay.
Davenport, appreciate it. Derek, could you weigh in a little bit in terms of education for, we talked about the administrative burden to the county for opting in?
To opt in would be the least administrative increase, I guess is the way to put it. To opt out and create a subgroup of districts that were not in the zone would be where the administrative lift would be. We would have to maintain basically 2 different tax rolls for that district, one for those that opted in and one for those that opted out. But to be clear, the permanent rate applied to the taxing base, the levy tax, the collected tax, then goes to the general unsegregated, at which point we have a distribution schedule and everybody gets their piece based on that distribution. So it wouldn't be a $1-to-1 dollar. It's if three districts, opted out, there wouldn't be a direct line between the money that was not given away in the exemption that was collected going to those 3 districts specifically. It would be additional dollars going to the general pool, which would have a larger distribution. And in theory, all districts would get a little bit more than they would have had you opted in.
Thank you.
Albeit there's 43 districts. So, you know, when you start talking about the dollar amounts, unless they get pretty significant, I don't know that it moves the needle again. I just wanted to make sure that we're clear that it could be as much as even $100,000 in abatements, that over 43 districts, and given the schedule of distribution, you know, smaller districts maybe feel it, but larger districts probably wouldn't notice the difference.
Commissioner Bershauer. I'm sorry, Derek, go ahead, finish your thought.
Yeah, from a labor standpoint, from an administrative standpoint, my office would feel the burden of just having to manage that and report on that and state reporting and how you bill and collect and that sort of thing. But, you know, we have urban renewal districts. This isn't that much different.
Thank you. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. And this is for Patrick or Keith, what is the status of the Waterfront Urban Renewal District? Is that in place now? Is it being proposed?
That's I would metaphorically say that's in the bullpen. We know that's coming, but there's some a lot of that area down where the mill is just in our urban growth boundary, and it would need to be annexed first and then zoned, and then the going through the urban renewal district implementation process. So it's not there yet.
Okay, but that is the plan.
There is intent and discussion to include that for sure.
Okay. I discussed this last time or mentioned this last time, but my frustration is with these zones. A lot of people call them tools. Urban renewal is a tool. Vertical housing zone is a tool, but what you're really doing is asking the taxpayers to pay for, mitigating some pretty unpleasant circumstances when it comes to considering where to develop properties and so on and so forth. And so we have to pull ourselves back and say, okay, what does this look like overall? And when you have multiple districts, your schools are bleeding money out the back end, your fire districts, your city services, anything like that. And you make it harder for them to cover their operating costs, to go after bonds and levies, because they are essentially paying for these carrots, if you will, for developers to come in. And it really kind of circumvents the real problem. The real problem is that the city of Newberg, for whatever reason, is 3 times as costly to develop than MAC is. So it's frustrating to me that we're considering these tools, because the actual implementation and the practice of them is that you're asking the wide tax base to kind of cover it, because there are some impediments to development and growth.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula.
Can I just get a clarification can you be more specific about the statement that it's 3 times the cost to develop in the city of Newberg? I'm curious if there's more specifics, or is that across the board?
Derek, did you want to give us those figures? Because I got them from you, so I'm gonna point to you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. The unit of comparison, Casey, and this is really the SDC charges. So we're talking about it's 9,000 in McMinnville, it's 35 plus in Newberg. The underlying analysis, studies, approvals for capital plans, as Mr. Davenport managed, those are specific to the cities. But I also agree that I'll leave it at that. Yeah, so that's why we're saying threefold. It's based on that unit of comparison, the single family home site development charge. Commercial development charges vary. I've seen situations where there's concessions by the city to offset SDC charges as an incentive. That sort of gets away from the standard in terms of, if you're going to build a house, it's X. If you're building the development across from Providence and you have wetland mitigation and you've got to go through these different state agencies to even get started, there may be some consideration given on SDC charges, some offsets. that varies. So I guess to bring it full circle, it's not 3 times across the board all property types. There is an indicator based on SDC charges for single family homes that it's 3 times as much, but that may translate differently when you talk about commercial or industrial property.
Okay, thank you. So it's specifically systems development charges for when you go to file a permit, fill out a permit for single family home construction in those 2 cities. That's the statement.
Actually, I would add that it's actually almost 4 times as much if you add CPRD's systems development charges of almost $8,000. So that brings you up to well over 40. So it approaches 4 times as much. And I don't know whether McMinnville's that $9,000 figure includes any other additional taxing district as well. But that being said, there's a wide difference, and I just wanted to see again if that those charges would be in some way softened as the incentive for a builder. Because I was at a meeting at CPRD when they discussed systems development charges, and there were 2 builders of multifamily housing units there, and they came to plead for no increase, and they walked out and said, we're going to build in Troutdale. Now, you know, we need multiple family housing, and we need apartments in Newberg, and yet that made it so that they just said it doesn't pencil out. We can't do it because if you look at the costs for multifamily, you're looking at almost $7,000, and then per unit per apartment. So that just made it prohibitive for them. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to get in the queue. Were you able to finish your comment?
Thank you for asking. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I know that you'll keep talking if you need to, but I don't want to interrupt. So I wonder, there's been a lot of conversations about systems development charges and mitigation, and I wonder whether, since this is something that I would imagine is not really in the planner's purview except to explain how it works, is if on another occasion we might invite, say, the mayor and a city councilor from Newburgh to have a discussion about it, and where the county might be able to help or encourage lobby for reductions in some of these as part of a bigger discussion. I'm just wondering, this is a different one, which is that it's a small carrot. And I remember Keith Leonard talking about that at our first presentation, maybe November, which is that it's not gonna, on its own, cause a developer to build something in downtown, but that if it's one of the tools in the toolbox, if it's a small carrot, I think was what it was. Sometimes small carrots are the sweetest. I'm just putting on my farmer hat right now. So in my view, opting in is a good step in showing that the county supports increasing residential development in the downtown core of Newberg, which is something that the city council has expressed an interest in.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Commissioner Berschauer, before I get to you, I just do want to add that I would be amenable to that. We don't know who's opting in and who's opting out. I'd like to make sure that it's, we're all in, instead of certain people feeling like they have to take the hit. Because remember, when we do this, it is the citizens of Yamhill County that ultimately are the ones who will be the ones who lose out on that revenue, however small it is. So I just want to make sure that we know that. But I want to know who's in and who's out before we make that call. So again, what's our drop dead time of giving you an answer?
The way the ORS is written, you have 30 days from the time upon receiving the regular mail notice. So it's, the ORS is clear as mud. And I'm kind of surprised when I look back at it and doesn't have anything that, it relies solely on somebody saying we received the letter. So it's 30 days from when you received it. And we did send out a return receipt, so we'd have some idea, but that doesn't tell us when you exactly received the regular mail letter. So it's supposed to be 30 days from that date.
Thank you.
We received the letter on February 12th. We have a date stamp on the letter that when our office received it, and it's in the packet. And based on what Mr. Leonard had shared, we have 30 days from February 12th.
Thank you, Mr. Huffer. Commissioner Bershauer, did you want to jump in?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with some of your sentiment about, first of all, identifying who the different taxing districts are that are left to weigh in, and then perhaps waiting to see what they do. I mean, we are kind of a smaller portion of that group. So I would be comfortable waiting to see, if CPRD is meeting tonight and maybe some of the others, I don't know who the others are, but waiting to see what they do, and then we can reconsider.
Thank you. Ken?
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly remind the board that we're still looking at it, but also the Board of Commissioners is also the, and I'm going to mess up the titles, but the executive directors for the extension service, which, so you'll be essentially making this decision twice, for representing two of the districts.
Thank you for pointing that out. Appreciate that. So, Derek, did you want to just sort of give us the summation here? I know that you've been very clear about what it means and what it wouldn't mean, but can you just give us from your perspective, how you would advise, or just what your input was?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, solely speaking from an administrative standpoint, administering this district, it doesn't have a lot of fundamental differences than an urban renewal. And the fact that it may actually be overlaid on an urban renewal has its own complexities. To opt out would be administratively a little more task. We could handle it. We could handle it with our current staff. We could handle it with our current platforms. I don't have concerns in that arena. The distribution and collection of tax would be fine once we set it up. It does have a sunset. It sunsets, I think, in 10 years by the project. So it's not an ongoing, open-ended, never-ending. We get some of that with urban renewal districts that don't have definitive end dates, that we don't know when they're going to end. They're just going to keep going. So to that end, it's got some sideboards. Other than that, I don't know that the dollar amount moves the needle, given the size of this. And so I would just say from an administrative standpoint, I think we'd be okay if you opted in or out, and dollar-wise, you've got what you need to make that decision in terms of the impact.
Thank you for that. Patrick, Mr. Davenport.
Yes, I just wanted to summarize Commissioner Lindsay's, just to give her a quick response on, I guess I'll summarize her comment, is it worth it with as costly as construction is? I would like to offer that if this one incentive is enough to encourage a developer or incentivize a developer to build such a project, I think the positive effect on your tax base and the effect it would have, the positive effect it would have on our, especially our downtown area, would probably far outweigh the fiscal impacts on the taxing district's budget. So yes, it is a tiny bit of a sacrifice, but if all this comes together and enables a new project to happen, I think your overall tax base and the effect it would have on downtown would be well worth it.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So then at this time, what we can do is we don't have any urgency. We do have another couple of weeks at least. And maybe by then, would Mr. Davenport, Mr. Leonard be able to keep us apprised? But Derek, you hear about this as well. Who is going to opt in and who is going to opt out? And then we can make our decision based on that. Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. Ken, do we have a timeline for the OSU extension? Was that received on the same day, or is that a different timeline?
We're looking at the letters and figuring out the process on what that's going to look like. It's usually, it's a little unique because usually the only time that we convene as the board of directors for the extension is usually for budget adoption. So that's why we haven't put a date on the calendar or done anything. We're talking to extension and letting them know, and they've received the letter, and we do have it here, but we'll need to get something scheduled here pretty soon.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, as we learn of the indications from other taxing districts, would you like us to send what we've learned to Ken, such as tonight? CPRD will hopefully have a decision for you. And would you like them just as they come in one at a time to be forwarded to you all?
Maybe send them to Ken, or you could, I guess that would be the easiest, and then he could send them out because Ken doesn't have enough to do during the day. We found out he's just sitting around with his feet up on his desk. So we'd like to keep him busy, a little good job security. Thank you for that. It just would probably be the best repository of this information, and then we can go from there. But we do appreciate it. So thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Wharf, Mr. Leonard, Mr. Davenport. Thank you for the discussion, and we will look forward to getting you some more information shortly. Oh, Mr. Huffer.
If I could just, because I'm trying to think on when, I'm trying to think of future agendas. And so we're not necessarily carrying this forward as old business over and over. Is there maybe a date that the board would like to, kind of target and continue this discussion so we can have it flagged to make sure we have it on the agenda to make sure that we take action on it?
Well, March 11th, is that cutting it way too close? March 11th, because March 12th, that's a month. Is that cutting it a little too close? I want to make sure we have all the information in. So the next one would be Thursday, the 4th.
Next week, or we could do the 4th or the 11th. So
does the 11th give us enough time to respond? Do we have to respond in any formal capacity, or would an email suffice?
Another gray area of the ORS, we would like to have a formal resolution, because what we plan on doing is taking this back to our planning commission. That's why we had a little bit of a shuffling. Really, this is geared toward the legislative portion of our government making a decision, but our community development director wanted to make sure that our planning commission, as they review this, have a full understanding of where the taxing jurisdictions are setting. So.
Christian?
So this would actually be something we would adopt. The board would act. It would be a board order. Sometimes these are adopted as both a board order and a resolution if the statute specifically calls out that it needs to be a resolution. But for this kind of a formal board action that actually has some legislative type of impact, it would be a board order. And we could reflect the action taken by the board in our action list. It would be assigned a board order, and that statement would say the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners have opted in or opted out of this issue. Would that be enough of a documentation for you to add to your files, or would you like it to be put in a formal sort of board order format, which we can do? But I just want to let you know that sometimes we have board orders where they take a formal action that doesn't have a separate standalone board order document.
I think I'll defer to our planning manager, Patrick. What is your preference with that? Because the ORS just doesn't seem to be clear.
Christian, we would take your just more of an informal notice for the planning commission. When we take it to the city council for formal, we would be attaching the formal decision documents to that. But for the planning commission, just as you mentioned, an action item situation, that would be great. That'd be enough for us. Thank you.
We'll go ahead and prepare a board order. So you'll be covered either way. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, appreciate it. All right, so then we'll go ahead and revisit that. And are we looking at the 11th? Yes. The 11th. The 11th should work if we just
Let's do the 11th.
Okay, let's do the 11th. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. And we'll get back to you with that determination on the 11th. Thank you.
Thank you
All right.
very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Derek. Okay, we can move on now to other business, which is item I, and that is I-1, consideration of approval to authorize Yamhill County Transit to submit an application for the 2021-23 Section 5311 federal grant for funding in the amount of $1,774,291 for Yamhill County Transit Administration operating and maintenance costs. And Cynthia Thompson, our transit manager, is here and will give us the explanation. Thank you for joining us, Cynthia.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think I explained it pretty clearly in the memo, but I'll just mention this is a federal funding source we call 5311, and it's our main source of operating funding. And all of the funds we get from this go essentially to our service provider for operations, maintenance, and administration. There is a portion of administration for like my time and administrative staff, county administrative staff that also is funded with this. I should mention that. Depending on the type of service, like if it's administration or operations or PM, there are different match rates, which I have included in the memo. Operations is more like a 60-40. The others are approximately a 10% match. Every year we receive a projection from the Department of Transportation, and it let us know what we can expect, and that's what this number is referring to, the $1,774,291. And then once the application's in and approved and we get a grant agreement, sometimes it can change slightly, but typically it doesn't. And you will see the grant agreement once we receive that prior to June 30th. So they usually have to have the agreements in place before the beginning of the July fiscal year and the new biennium. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if that didn't cover enough information for you.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, do we have any questions, or were the items in the packet sufficient? Commissioner.
The items were good for me. Thank you. And note that the application that we have in front of us is from last time around, but it has a lot of good detailed information. And then there's the memo.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for clarifying that. I wasn't quite finished with the new application, so it doesn't change a lot. Typically, the thing that changes is sometimes I will change based on actual expenditures. I might change the amount that we slate for administration and the amount we slate for preventive maintenance. And I do that after I really look at where we're at and what our activity has been over the last biennium.
Thank you. So if we have no more questions, do we have a motion to approve item I-1?
I would move that we approve item I-1.
We have a motion to approve. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And Cynthia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll move on to I-2, which is consideration of approval of a personal services contract between Yamhill County and Kathleen Horgan for court mediation services in the amount of $85 an hour, not to exceed 5 hours per original case filing. And that's retroactive to February 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. And we did discuss the parameters of this, or the structure of this, last time, and this is just approving the contract. Any Christian?
Yeah, it's actually approving. It's the second contract, so it's identical to the first one, but they did come forward with a second one. And what we understand from the courts is that for the time being, this is the only other one of these that they expect to come forward.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So do we have a motion to approve?
Chair, I move that we approve item I2.
Motion to approve item I2. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. On to item I3, which is the consideration of adopting Resolution 21-02-25-1 in support of the local economy and businesses of Yamhill County impacted by COVID-19. I brought this resolution forward because I know that the majority of what we've done in terms of letters to the governor and legislators and a variety of different symbolic actions has really been also just to extend our support for our local businesses. And what I was hoping in this resolution is that we would basically request the governor uphold her pledge to support and defend the U.S. and Oregon constitutions, and that she lift orders restricting our businesses, and that she considers all businesses essential, because the businesses that are either shuttering or struggling now, they're pretty essential when it comes to supporting their families. And I would like to call out a specific part of this resolution, which asks the governor to direct state agencies, that's OHA, that's OLCC, that's Oregon OSHA, to limit their citations to those infractions of policies that were in place prior to the COVID-19 directives. So in other words, when you're hearing about businesses that are receiving fines or in any other way citations, that we look at those and sort of roll those back to prior to the COVID-19 directives. And also, part of this resolution encourages our legislative representatives to support amendments to the Oregon Constitution, which would limit the governor's, any governor, past, present, future, I guess, any governor's authority to restrict our freedoms under the auspices of these prolonged declarations of emergency. Because I think we know that not all states allow governors to have such broad emergency powers. We're looking at a year now where we have had these restrictions in place. So I would just open it up for discussion, and you have the resolution in front of you and you've had an opportunity to read it. So your input and your thoughts. Thank you.
Point of clarification, Chair. I believe you said asking our legislators to amend the Constitution, and I don't believe that legislators can do that on their own. Is that correct?
No, but we're asking them to take that into consideration. In fact, there's a bill before the legislature now, which would ask them to have a broader input into these extension of declarations.
I think the resolution that we have before us says amendments to ORS, but you had spoken of constitutional amendments. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, I misspoke. It's amendments to the ORS. Comments overall on the resolution? To me, the most important thing here is that we are supporting our businesses. We see that our businesses have been restricted to 25% capacity. The resolution talks about this violating the Fifth Amendment, in that no person can be deprived of his property without due compensation, and that they have been considered non-essential, and certain businesses like restaurants and gyms and bars. So that's really what was behind that, that we take a look at how we can support our businesses by encouraging the governor to pull back on some of these. Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you. And again, I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I was in the queue. So how is the word essential related to the
Sorry, Commissioner Kula, I think you cut off there at the end.
Yeah, sorry, I was holding the space bar. So I just want to thank you. I was like, why are they not saying anything? This is my version of, am I muted? So you had mentioned essential, and then you related it to the Fifth Amendment for businesses. And I'm wondering about what exactly the connection is there of non-essential and essential to the Fifth Amendment specifically.
Thank you for that. If you look at the resolution where it talks about Article 1, Section 18 of the Constitution says that private property should not be taken for private use, nor the particular services of any man demanded without just compensation. In no case, in the case of the state, without first compensation and first assessed and tendered. When the governor deemed a number of businesses non-essential, these were businesses that were many ways substantially not too much different than other businesses that were allowed to stay open. And she has placed significant restrictions on the bars and the restaurants and the athletic clubs. So in terms of a Fifth Amendment taking, whereas their property, their ability to do business has been restricted, there's that takings, and that some businesses were deemed non-essential. So there's that takings component as it relates to businesses that were told they're not essential and therefore can't operate.
Okay, thank you. Essential businesses that lost business or lost income because of restrictions, do they have a standing then as well? I'm just kind of confused about, I've read the executive orders. I just don't know, like, what are businesses that are deemed essential? And I know that a lot of businesses had restrictions placed upon them. So the focus on making all businesses essential, I'm confused about the connection there.
Well, the connection is that we have had arbitrary decisions made about what businesses are considered non-essential. So for instance, we have a liquor store that's able to stay open, essential. We have supermarkets that are considered essential. We have restaurants that are considered non-essential. And so the impacts to those in terms of dining being restricted or forbidden indoors, if you look at places where restaurants are the only place that our seniors are getting their meals, those restaurants close down. That's another avenue for folks who typically not able to access that their meals there. So by telling you that your business is non-essential and closing it down, you've been restricted from basically, operating.
Okay, so then I guess, but essential businesses were also restricted. So are we asking or demanding that they also be provided compensation? And then the second part of that is that there's a call later on for only independently owned businesses to be deemed essential. And I don't know what you mean by independently owned versus not independently owned.
Well, let me go back to the essential, non-essential. So let's take a look at grocery stores and malls and retail outlets. Their capacity has not been restricted by and large. So in other words, they are able to operate. They have mask requirements and things like that. But those businesses have been able to operate going forward. The bars and the restaurants and businesses like that, the gyms, have not been able to operate. And so those, when you say independently owned, meaning that they are owned by someone whose business that is. So that is virtually, all businesses.
Okay, so maybe I'm just confused. You are explaining this very thoroughly, I feel like. But it doesn't, I don't feel like it's really matching the text of this resolution, which is why I have some concerns about it, as you may understand from me asking you these questions. My understanding is that almost all businesses that interact with the public have been affected at some degree by the coronavirus or the coronavirus restrictions. Is that not something that you would acknowledge?
I think that it would be safe to say that all businesses have been impacted by the restrictions, but not all businesses have shared equally in the burden of those restrictions. And to wit, we would discuss the gymnasiums and to restaurants who many of them have had to close, catering businesses. So they have had to bear an unequal burden because they were determined not to be essential. So for instance, Fred Meyer and Safeway, they're not really in any way, shape, or form losing out on revenue, but the businesses on 3rd Street in McMinnville are, because they can only do takeout.
Okay, so, but there, and so are you trying to connect businesses that are independently owned with being, having a greater burden on them than businesses that aren't independently owned? And what do you mean by independently owned versus not? I'm still not tracking that in terms of this document.
So if that's a sticking point, we can take out the word independently owned if that would get you to a place where you could support this. Because the distinction here is really about declaring a business non-essential and in effect rendering it unable to operate.
Okay, so then thank you, Commissioner Burchard. Do you mind if I should just let you?
No, go ahead.
Ask my question later. Oh,
No,
okay.
please, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Commissioner Cool, I was just trying to get in the queue when you were done. So do you want to proceed?
You're figuring that one out.
Are you
okay,
sure?
So no, what I will do is I will just ask one more thing.
Okay, sounds good.
So it based upon what I'm seeing in this proposed, what is it, a resolution, is that you're asking, or we're stating in it that all businesses be declared essential. And what I would like to know is what, for the purposes of this resolution, does that mean?
Thank you. That's a great question. So let's talk about what businesses were allowed to stay open and what businesses were closed. So we have marijuana retailers have been allowed to stay open. We have liquor stores that have been allowed to stay open. Gyms and restaurants, schools have been otherwise impacted. So although these keep changing in terms of who's allowed to open and under what circumstances, if you declare all businesses essential, it is essential to the businesses themselves that they remain open, because no business is non-essential. For me, I would say, for instance, that a liquor store is not essential, nor is a marijuana retailer in terms of just sustaining life. Although some people, unfortunately, that is an area of dependence. That's not the point. The point is, if you really want to talk about what is essential, marijuana and alcohol are not essential, food is. So why we have restaurants who are being told you can't serve, you can't serve people here who want to come in and have a meal, and you can come in and work out, but you can go in and buy marijuana and alcohol. That's what I'm saying, is if we're going to have these arbitrary closures and restrictions, let's determine what we consider essential.
Okay, thank you. And then Commissioner Burchard, can I ask one follow-up just before you, okay, and then we can keep going, but thank you. So then I think the question would be, because based upon the text of it, it doesn't sound like the COVID, the rules and the guidance around mask wearing indoors and capacity, it doesn't sound like those are things you're wanting to scrap, but simply just have the businesses be open. And if that's an accurate reading of the statement, then the thing about directing all state agencies to drop all citations seems like it doesn't go with that of like still having guidance and restrictions or mandates in place for when a business is open. So I'm just not sure about what we're trying to do here.
Okay, thank you for that question. And I would just refer you to the second to last paragraph, where it says that we urge residents and citizens to follow COVID-19 mitigation best practices and measures under the auspices of being self-governing and committed to protecting our well-being and that of our neighbors without coercion. So while we talk about best practices, if you were to look at the best practices that are suggested regarding COVID mitigation, there are those who believe that masks and social distancing would follow under those categories. And that is when I go back to the paragraph before that, asking us to ask the governor to direct state agencies to basically lay off the businesses that have been fined pretty significant amounts of money for not having not having masks or for not enforcing 6 feet of social distancing. So I think what we're saying is, what we're asking for is a prayer for judgment, for mercy, for the businesses that have been giving pretty significant fines. That's all we're saying. We're not saying don't encourage these, but the coercion and the fines, that's the part that we're trying to soften the blow for the businesses that have had these fines.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. I think that a resolution like this is really has been born of frustration because, and we all feel it, right? It's the feeling of being powerless to do anything to help businesses who are reaching out to us constantly and essentially saying that they can't go for another 2 weeks or whatever it is, they can't go forward, they're not going to make it. What do you do in this situation? It's very difficult to know what to do to try and help. And I think one of my biggest frustrations through the past year is this essentially government picking winners and losers by way of deeming some businesses essential and some businesses are not. In practice, that might not be a stated policy, but in practice, that's what's happening. It doesn't make sense to anybody that you can go into a Costco and not be socially distanced, and yet a restaurant is too dangerous. And in fact, some of the scientific metrics that have come back on spread has really limited it to inside the family household. So there's a lot of things that just don't make sense. And I think that it is imperative for us to stand with our small businesses. And even when you're considering violations, I remember there was a Costco, I think it was a Costco in Eastern Washington that had an outbreak, and that business wasn't shut down. There was a different standard applied to a Costco, perhaps because of who they are, versus maybe what Old Town Bar and Grill is facing in Newberg. So I'm very bothered by the fact that as a result of this emergency declaration, or these, that groups like OSHA and OLCC have really been weaponized against our small businesses, and every business is essential. I just had a conversation, message back and forth with the owner of Coyote Joe's, his daughter. This man is 79, 80 years old, and his life is essential. His business, his means of supporting his family is essential. The people he employs are essential. So I think that, you know, the fact that we're considering a resolution like this is really, it's a sign that we're getting pretty desperate here. I mean, how else are we supposed to fight for the people in our county? And I think it's a step forward. Hopefully the governor is listening. So I am absolutely inclined to sign this resolution.
Thank you, Commissioner. I wanted to piggyback on that mention of Coyote Joe's, and that restaurant, for those who are not aware of it, in the West Valley, every year the owner of Coyote Joe's puts on Christmas Day a dinner, a beautiful dinner for the entire community. He provides toys, he provides food at his own expense. And this is something that this is so foundational to this community. You take that away, and he's very close. I mean, he was a recipient of a grant, but they're very close to losing that. You take that out of the West Valley, no one is going to come in and fill that void. And so what we're saying here is these are not just businesses. This is the lifeblood of the community, and the West Valley is a perfect example of how that hurts. So at this point, if there's no other further discussion, I would like to, Commissioner Kula, did you want to comment?
Yes, and then Christian has a comment too.
Christian.
His is probably a
I'm in the
procedural.
queue. I'm in the queue.
Okay, you're up.
Okay, thank you. I do think that there's a lot of value in us proclaiming with one voice that essentially businesses are important. There are so many definitions of what an essential business is that I hesitate to pile on to that, especially because there's some, you're leaving out right now some businesses from being deemed essential. So I just want to, we don't need to vilify businesses that don't meet the category of independently owned. I personally don't know what you mean by that. But what I would love to do is have a statement together where we say that the businesses and the people that they employ and the people that they serve in our community are all important. Maybe even add the word essential there, and that they should all be held to the same standards. That's different than what this statement and this resolution does. I do think that there is value in having restrictions that apply uniformly across these businesses. I don't know your anecdote about the Costco and you don't have to social distance. I've never heard of a business that didn't have to follow those regulations in Oregon, but I mean, I guess if you're a massage practitioner, you don't have to follow the social distancing either. So maybe there's something where massage practitioners and tattoo artists and Costco's all get the same level of treatment, but it would be surprising to me. But I just want to say that supporting our businesses is a very important thing. And I could see supporting a resolution that has more of a forceful focus on that.
Well, Commissioner, if I take out independently owned, would that be something, would you be able to support us asking the governor to ask these state agencies to roll back their citations and their to prior to COVID-19 directives?
I feel like I need to think about that. And mostly it's because my understanding is that there's a fairly high degree of discretion, and that there is essentially a safe harbor, and that only folks who are very specifically continuing to violate rules that the inspectors have come to them with are being fined. So unless there's something different that I don't know about, I'm very hesitant to say like, hey, let's forgive these blatant violations of the law.
Well, they're not laws. They're not violations of the law. There is no law that says we could get in that greater discussion, but they're not violating the law.
So it's an administrative rule, is that correct?
They are conditions of emergency declarations and executive orders, but they're not laws.
So
I think we've already
Christian,
had that.
Christian, to clarify, are administrative rules considered laws?
My understanding is these executive orders authorize these state agencies to regulate in this area through the use of administrative rules.
And I think there's a clear distinction. So I'm going to go ahead, and I think you've had time to look at this. And if it's your decision not to sign on to this, I completely understand. But I'm going to have the resolution stand with the removal of the word all independently owned businesses, and just take out all businesses as essential, and ask the governor to treat them as such. So at this time, I'm going to call for the question. All those in Commissioner, I have to read this, don't I? Christian?
One question before you read the resolution. I had missed this before, but in the whereas clause that discusses Article 1, Section 18 of the Oregon Constitution, it should read, private property shall not be taken for public use, not private use.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Commissioner Burschauer.
Chair, I just wanted to make a point that I believe the governor just extended the emergency order that was set to expire on March 3rd. So there is seemingly no end to these extensions of emergency orders. So I think this is even more of an important discussion at this point.
Yes, and those are going to be extended for 60 days, my understanding is. Thank you.
Right. And then Chair, along those lines, some of the whereases are things that I'm comfortable with and some I'm not comfortable with. And I just want to make sure that you recognize that.
I do. Thank you very much. So we have a motion, and prior to the motion, do I need to read this, Christian? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead.
That is our standard practice, is to have these resolutions read into the record.
All right. So at this time, I'll read the Resolution 21-02-25-1 in the matter of a resolution in support of the local economy and businesses of Yamhill County impacted by COVID-19. I should put COVID-19 restrictions. Whereas on March 8th, 2020, the governor issued a declaration of emergency to facilitate the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and since that date has issued 23 emergency directives. And whereas the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution declares no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. And whereas Article 1, Section 18, Oregon Constitution declares private property should not be taken for public use, nor the particular services of any man demanded without just compensation, nor except in the case of the state, without such compensation first assessed and tendered. And whereas the governor deemed within her power and discretion to classify many businesses as non-essential, despite many of these businesses being substantially the same as others classified as essential. And whereas we assert the governor's orders that businesses be closed or restricted to 25% capacity violates the Fifth Amendment right that declares no citizen can be deprived of his property without, quote, due process of law. And whereas the governor has placed significant restrictions on bars, restaurants, athletic clubs, and related businesses, and whereas today Yamhill County health officials, aided by the continued trust and diligence of Yamhill County residents, have managed outbreaks of COVID-19 without overwhelming hospital capacity. And whereas a current shutdown policies have caused societal, emotional, and economic harm. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners calls on the governor to uphold her solemn pledge to support, protect, and defend the U.S. and Oregon constitutions, and requests that she lift orders restricting our local businesses and limiting the size of peaceful gatherings. And be it further resolved that the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners considers all businesses essential and asks the governor to treat them as such. And be it further resolved that the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners calls on the governor to direct state agencies, including Oregon Health Authority, Oregon Occupational Health and Safety, and Oregon Liquor Control Commission to limit their citations to those infractions in place prior to COVID-19 directives. And be it further resolved that the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners urges residents and citizens to follow COVID-19 mitigation best practices and measures under the auspices of being self-governing and committed to protecting our well-being and that of our neighbors without coercion. And be it further resolved that the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners encourages our legislative representatives to aggressively support amendments to the Oregon revised statutes that would limit any governor's authority to restrict our freedoms under the auspices of a declared and prolonged declaration of emergency, dated this 25th day of February 2021. Do we have a motion to approve? All those in favor? Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, I make a motion to approve item I3.
Motion to approve item I3. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners. Motion passes. On to item I4. Consideration of adopting Resolution 21-02-25-2, which is extending the COVID-19 emergency declaration. Ken, did you want to give us the sort of the prologue to this?
Yeah, I think either Christian or I. Christian prepared the resolution. This is our local declared emergency that has been in place and extended several times since March of last year. And so it's before you as a discussion item. It's set to expire the 28th. So this is the last formal session before the expiration of the local declared emergency.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions from the commissioners?
I think, Chair,
Yes.
I think that my question that would probably be for Ken, Christian, and then really for Director Manfrin is, is there a continued need for this at the county level?
No, and that's a good question, because I know this has been posed before, and I did have follow-up conversations with Director Manfrin. You know, in reviewing it, you know, again, what the local emergency does under the declaration, it grants us the ability to, it's some exemptions to procurement policies. You know, so it doesn't necessarily slow us down if we need to make a procurement, that we're not necessarily having to get 3 quotes or go through some of the processes if we need to make a purchase and get something. It also allows for the implementation of temporary policies under the declared emergency. The board empowered the county administrator to, subject to ratification, to implement temporary policies. And there's some ability to do reassignments and handle some things under the collective bargaining agreement, you know, like the policy implementation, reassigning a staff or things like that, that because it's under an emergency, it sets those emergency conditions for being able to do that, take some of those actions. As we've been going, they've been in place. I think early on we had need for this, and then there was a lot of unknown, and we have utilized under the declared emergency, have taken some actions like temporary policies, implementing those, doing some emergency hires when HHS needed to bring on some additional contact tracing, and then also being able to adjust staffing to respond for contact tracing and for coverage issues there. Right now, what we're seeing in conversations, we're not seeing that we're utilizing it at this time. It hasn't necessarily, we haven't had something come up here recently that's required us to act under the declared emergency. So the answer, and I think it's been what we've done on the previous extensions, it's not necessarily that we've used it, it's being able to have that available to us. Because we can't really predict what may be coming at us next. But at the same time, you know, so the answer is we haven't had to utilize that here recently.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. Then as a follow-up, I guess my wonder is if we get to a point where, so if we allowed it to lapse, bearing in mind that the state level emergency is in place, which I think is an important thing to acknowledge, right? Commissioner, Chair Sarah and I have talked about this a lot in our meetings. It's like, oh yeah, there is this state. And again, Commissioner Berschauer acknowledged as well that it has continued. One of the things that's obviously valuable about that is FEMA reimbursements. But in this case, with if we were to allow it to lapse, we could, if we found, if a department discovered an urgent need that was associated with COVID, we could call a special meeting, adopt or declare an emergency. Is that correct? And then the department could do what they need to do. Is that accurate?
I believe so, and I'm looking at Christian as well, but I do think, as the commissioners have noted, because I saw the announcement about the 60-day extension to the state level declared emergency. So we do have, you know, this is that extra layer that's more of a local, you know, over the last year, whether it's access to FEMA funds or access to CARES Act, has not required a local declared emergency up to this point. But you're correct that at any point the situations could change, just like we've experienced over the last 12 months with several declared emergencies, a couple of them that have come up for the board. it is something that could be revisited at a later date or as needed.
Thank you. Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. It seems like this declaration was necessary in the beginning. Nobody really knew what COVID was or how we were going to respond to it, and necessitated a declaration. But it's been a year. We have learned how to manage the pandemic, and it sounds like there really isn't any current usage of the declaration. So I'm not really inclined to extend it. At the last meeting, we extended telecommuting for county staff to, I believe, March 31st. So we're sort of easing out of this state of emergency, and the governor might have her own reasons for extending a state of emergency, funding, et cetera, but I want to be careful that we don't just continue operating under this kind of not false sense, but just this term state of emergency. It just doesn't really apply. It's been a year. So it doesn't prevent us in the future if, the locusts come or whatever happens, it doesn't prevent us from establishing another one for whatever is coming in the future. So at this time, I'm not really inclined to extend it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Commissioner Bershauer. And I feel that it's important for us to make the statement that we're not dealing with an emergency in an emergent capacity. Our hospitals are not overwhelmed. We are to call this a state of emergency, I think, is disingenuous. And I don't want to piggyback on what the governor is doing, because I think what she's doing, it's got a lot of detrimental effects. I don't think we need one. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just getting in the queue, as we all say now. I did want to clarify the next two agenda items, I think, are temporary policies. I just want to make sure, are those contingent, Ken, on our continued emergency declaration, or can we modify them if necessary?
That's the reason I put those on the agenda after this, because depending on, and actually I have an update, because really it's just one of the policies is directly tied to the local, the expiration was tied to the local declared emergency. And so I wanted to have the opportunity to have the discussion. If it's decided not to continue the declared emergency, then I wanted to have the discussion about the one temporary policy that is connected to this.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Well, I think it would be important for us to know how that would impact that policy.
So when we were rolling out a lot of the temporary policies back in March, and kind of learning as we go, because this was something new, the policy, it's going to be what I put on, it's agenda item I-6, that's actually the expiration date. It can either be extended by the Board of Commissioners, or it expires with the local declared emergency. So it is the only one that's tied to that is the temporary modification to the donation of flexible earn time or vacation time. Item H5, I incorrectly, on first read, I thought it was tied to the local emergency. That one's actually tied to the governor's state emergency as far as an expiration date. So the effect that it would have is if the local declared emergency were to expire, then the modification to being able to donate leave for employees that are experiencing hardships associated to the school closures, then that temporary policy would expire and would no longer be in effect unless the board took a separate action to extend that.
Thank you, Ken. Do we have any other questions? So at this time, Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm reading through the order here. the other thing it would do is it specifically authorized the board during the term of the emergency to meet by telephonic or electronic means pursuant to 192-670. You've got separate statutory authority to do that, but we did specifically mention that in here. So if the board is proposing to change how they've been meeting, or if you wanted to talk about that, or we could take a separate action later to continue to have an express authorization for you to do that. But it's been made clear in some of the governor's orders as well that public entities are allowed to meet virtually.
And our own, yes, our own provisions allow for that prior to this. It just
Yeah.
requires that the board weigh in on
That is one element of the emergency order, as is the activation of the EOC. And again, I don't know if that's something that is essential given the sort of day-to-day nature of this at the moment.
All right. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion for item I4. Christian?
I don't know that you need to take formal action. If you don't extend it, it will expire on its own on the 28th. If you'd like to have something formally reflected on the record that you voted not to extend it, you could do that. But otherwise, the board would simply not take any further action, and then the order would expire on its own on the 28th.
Thank you. I think it would be important for us to have this on record that we decided not to extend this. So I'll entertain a motion. Okay, I'll go ahead and make the motion. I make a motion that we allow the resolution extending the COVID-19 emergency declaration, resolution 21-02-25-2, that we do not extend the emergency declaration. Any further discussion? Commissioner Kula.
I'm sorry, I was just looking at the resolution or the declaration resolution, and it didn't have the same numbers, but maybe I'm just a little confused.
21-02-25-2, item 4.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, I'm looking on the packet rather than the agenda. So that's the only thing. It just doesn't have a number on it, the current or the proposed one. So I was looking at what was the most recent resolution, which is the one that expires at the end or on the 28th.
And again, these have been adopted as both a resolution and a board order. So if you were to have taken action today to extend it, it would have been given a new board order. But it's the resolution and the previous board order that would be expiring on the 28th.
Okay. Commissioner Bursch.
Chair, do we have to cite those specifically? Because Commissioner Kula is right, there's no numbers. So I guess I'm confused.
I don't think you do.
Okay, going by the agenda resolution item.
Correct, because I believe that if I heard the motion right, the motion is whether or not to extend the emergency declaration or not.
And that would be adopting a new resolution with a new number.
If you were choosing to extend, right, and if you were choosing to extend by using the document that's in the packet, yeah.
Correct. All right. Well, then I'll amend my motion to allow for the lapse of the COVID-19 declaration, emergency declaration. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. On to item I5, which is consideration of extending the COVID-19 paid administrative leave policy previously approved by Board Order 20-91. Ken?
Yeah, and this was the one that I mistakenly, it doesn't require any further action. It's tied to the governor's order. This was one that we said it can be extended by the board, or it would lapse upon if the governor's state of emergency was not extended. So it's tied to that. So there's no action that has to be taken on that policy.
Thank you. So then we can move on to item I6, which is consideration of a temporary modification to the donation of flexible earned time or vacation leave policy.
And as I mentioned with this one was a temporary modification to our existing FET policy that's been in place for quite some time. And this added an additional provision that's similar to a provision that was changed for the Oregon Family Medical Leave Act, OFLA, that allows for employees to donate vacation time to another employee who's experiencing a hardship because of COVID-related school closures. And if they're having to take time off and they have insufficient time, it just allows employees to be able to make donations, voluntary donations.
Thank you. So as far as the extension of this, that's something that because of the state declaration, we would not necessarily have to consider.
This one was tied to the local emergency.
Okay, sorry, misunderstood.
That was an oversight. We had some inconsistency with some of the temporary policies early on when we were running out the door, kind of drafting these and trying to implement these to address specific concerns and issues that were coming to our attention.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. So would the, I guess the simplest thing would be, would we modify it to connect it to the governor's declared emergency as a way to keep it going in a way that's simple and seamless to people on staff?
I think that's one option, and that would be my recommendation for consistency, or you could do like the telework policy and make it a date certain extension. It's really up to the board. But my recommendation would be, because the OFLA modification was part of the governor's order and that modification, and we're trying to maintain some consistency because OFLA, being able to take time off, unpaid protected leave under OFLA for a school closure is allowable under OFLA. And so then this allows for somebody who's in that situation that other employees could donate leave to cover that time off.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Kula, did you want to make the motion based on that amendment?
Yes. Should I, Chair, would you like me to restate, or do you want us to just go with this on the record there?
Would you restate?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm juggling screens here. So I would move that we approve extending the temporary modification to the donation of flexible earned time or FET or vacation leave policy previously approved by the board. The modification being tying it to the governor's declared state of emergency.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you for that. At this point, I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break before we go into our discussion about the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance. Is that okay with everybody? We're going to keep the YouTube recording will keep going. We'll just take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Okay, it looks like everybody is back and accounted for. Thank you very much. At this point, we will reconvene the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners for February 25th at the point of item I-7, consideration of a Yamhill County Second Amendment Sanctuary Ordinance. Commissioner Burschauer. Oh, Ken?
If I may, before we on the agenda, I just wanted to quickly talk about the public comments that we've received, because we've received a lot of public comments that have come in up until, and just like the agenda says, anything that would become part of the record for this meeting is any written comments received up prior to the meeting. So I just wanted to quickly address that it's taken staff time to prepare the documents, and so I'm not sure if all of the written comments have been shared with the commissioners yet, because based on the volume and having to break that up into, and consolidate and get it ready to share with the commissioners, they're working on that. But I also wanted to highlight that it appears that we've at least gotten at least another 83 comments that have come in since the meeting has started. But those, because they came in after the meeting had already started, they won't necessarily be added to the record for this meeting. And I just wanted to clarify that, staff is trying to navigate a large volume of comments that have been coming through the email system.
Thank you for that. And I want to thank Carrie Hinton and Carolina Rook. They received, I'm going to say it's probably approaching 1,000 emails. We did have, so thank you for that. It required printing and scan, and they are going to have to be scanned and put into the public record. The commissioners have received them in their email boxes, but and were able to look at a number of them, but again, the sheer volume of them. We did have a constituent who asked that we keep track of the proponents and the opponents and the numbers so that we could be accurate in reporting how that has shaken out. At this point, I would say the last time I stopped counting, it's probably over 800 in favor of the ordinance, and I stopped at 50 who were opposed to it, but that definitely is going to change. But the Ken.
And I just wanted to also just go on record for the meeting that that's not something historically we have done it as staff on tracking those types of statistics. We basically collect all the comments that have been submitted to the record, and we keep it together as a packet, and it's available for anyone, that once we make it available, they can go through and count, because unlike a land use hearing, when we're meeting over in the old days, when we were meeting in person in room 32 for a land use hearing, where we have a comment card where people would either mark in support or in opposition, just based on the sheer volume. And then, sometimes, we're just trying to compile the comments. We're not necessarily going through and reading every comment as staff, because these comments are for you, the commissioners. And so we just want to make sure that we have a complete record, that we're receiving them and have them in the packet. So I just wanted to head off before we get requests of staff to say how many pro or how many in support and how many in opposition. That's not something that we track as staff.
Thank you for that. Carrie Hinton just let us know we have at this point 1,118 just in of the, I guess, in the last batch. And we did have a constituent who asked that we keep track of that. And so I was just sort of anecdotally, informally keeping track so that I could respond to that request. It does look like the overwhelming number of emails that we're getting are in favor of that. But that, again, it's not official. It's just from eyeballing the emails that are coming in. And that's neither here nor there, and it's not official. So Commissioner Burschauer, you brought this ordinance for our discussion. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to note too that while we've read some of them, we have not read all of them. A lot of them came in after 10 o'clock after this meeting started. So I do want to make sure that the public that's listening knows that we intend to go back and read them all, even though at this point that hasn't been done. I brought this ordinance forward. This has come before the board a couple times before, I think in 2015 and 2019, I want to say. I think it's imperative that we consider an ordinance like this. Personally, my personal sense of frustration and urgency is Senate Bill 554, which just passed out of committee this morning. A bill like this, and this is just one example, but a bill like this essentially targets lawfully abiding CHL holders. I happen to be one. And it will create a minefield, what I describe as a minefield. You can call it a patchwork, but minefield sounds more appropriate, where cities and localities, municipalities can create, in essence, gun-free zones in their public buildings. So for example, the city of McMinnville City Council could vote to deem all of their public buildings as gun-free zones. And what that does is it creates a patchwork of places that lawfully abiding CHL holders cannot go. The consequence of going on the premises or even adjacent to, which is in the language of the bill, it's anybody's guess as to what adjacent to means, but I'm assuming it means next to the building on the sidewalk, that the consequence is a Class C felony, which I confirmed with the sheriff is an arrestable offense, as well as up to $125,000 fine. So in essence, you are creating felons out of otherwise lawfully abiding CHL holders. That's a problem. And it's very frustrating that the effort in Salem specifically seems to be against lawfully abiding gun owners, firearm owners, rather than addressing really the root cause of gun violence. And so my purpose in bringing this forward is really to protect the lawfully abiding gun owners and people who visit our county, so that they are not unfairly targeted or cited or arrested or prosecuted for something that otherwise wouldn't be a crime. I fundamentally believe that it's our constitutional right to bear arms, and I do so myself. And I feel that the legislation coming out of Salem and potentially coming out of the federal government is so egregious that we are now at a point where we need to stand up and protect our residents. What the ordinance does not do, and it's modeled after Columbia County's ordinance, which was brought forward by the voters, not the commissioners, but the voters. It's modeled after that one. What it doesn't do is it doesn't allow for the invalidation of any other firearm regulation. So state, federal law does not invalidate those. It also does not allow felons, people who are convicted of a crime, or underage folks or anything like that, to essentially get out of being charged with a crime that involves a firearm. What it does do is it essentially says, and it directs our county officials to not enforce certain regulations around firearms that we deem inappropriate. The discretion falls to the sheriff, but he already has discretion, but it continues to fall with the sheriff as well as the county commissioners now. And the sticking point is really the expenditure of county funds. We're basically saying that the county is not going to spend resources or funds on the enforcement of certain firearm regulations. So an example is, if I get pulled over for speeding and I pull into the parking lot of the Newberg Library, and the Newberg Library Board has deemed itself a gun-free zone, not only am I getting a speeding ticket, but now is technically, as a CHL holder, if I'm carrying my firearm, I am guilty of a Class C felony, which is arrestable. So what this would say is it doesn't dictate what a Newberg Dundee police officer can do or cite for. However, when it reaches the point where I'm either booked into a jail or any sort of county resources are expended in the process, it puts a stop to that. So it doesn't prevent the enforcement of other laws, but what it does is it doesn't unfairly target CHL holders for these very reasons. And I would like to open it up for discussion because I know this is a very important topic for all of us. And then I can address to some of the concerns that the sheriff had as well when I met with him.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula, did you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I thank you for that presentation. I must say that when I read the draft or the sample that's in the agenda, which is itself not an ordinance, I didn't see the same level of very specific allowances, disallowances that you presented, and so that's good to hear. You may want to make it pretty more clear in the document than the things that are allowed and not allowed, because I think there's at least two spots where they're not connected in time, but one says firearms and the other says, well, all firearms except for things that are full, or we draw, it sounds like at some point it draws a line between fully automatic and not. So I think that should probably be clarified. My questions on this one arise from the statement is that this proposed ordinance would not forbid other jurisdictions than within it. And that was, or at least that's what I was hearing, is it wouldn't forbid other jurisdictions from say adopting gun-free spaces in accordance with this bill. And forgive me, I haven't actually read that bill. There were several emails that referenced it, and then Christian sent it to me. I did not get to reading it yet because I was hoping that we'd have a little bit of time here to discuss it, look through the comments. But what I wonder about is in your hypothetical where you're at the Newberg Public Library and you are arrested by a Newberg Police Department officer for having a gun, a firearm. I'm going to try to use just firearm. For having a firearm in a firearm-free zone. Under this proposed ordinance, you couldn't be booked into the jail because that would violate the ordinance. But could the DA charge you? Could you be tried? Could you come before a judge? And I say that because I ask about that because, you know, the DA is like kind of an employee of the state, but kind of, you know, our district attorney as well. And so that's one of the areas where I'm like, can we forbid the judicial department from doing things? Or maybe this isn't attempting to do that. So that I'm just a little bit confused in that area at the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner Kula and Chair. My understanding is that the trigger, for lack of a better term, the trigger of it is that it's any county resources, assets, any sort of funds, anything that's coming and originating from the county cannot be utilized to enforce some of these. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't enforce any gun laws or restrictions. It means that we are assuming the kind of legislative authority to do so. We are working with our sheriff to determine what we are going to enforce and what we are not going to enforce. It doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all in Yamaha County, but it is a very clear communication to other jurisdictions. And you're right, it would not give us any authority to dictate what cities do. They would, and especially under Senate Bill 554, if it passes, they would have the authority to determine which public buildings are gun-free zones. So we can't stand in the way of that. We can certainly not declare any county buildings, public buildings, gun-free zones. It also does not prevent us from deterring the actions of city law enforcement. But what it does say is that when that comes into contact with the county, you hit a wall. Because of this ordinance, you are not allowed to spend county funds and resources on enforcing something like that. Now, the sheriff asked, okay, what does that mean for a crime that's committed when the gun itself is the aggravating factor? And would that prevent me from charging somebody with a crime and the gun is now the aggravating factor? And the answer is no, it wouldn't prevent him from doing that, because he does continue to keep some of that discretion. It's just that now the discretion is also falling on the governing body of the county, which happens to be the county commissioners.
I want to respond to that question about the DA. The DA would come under the auspices of the county, and also to the reference to fully auto. Those are illegal. And so those are patently illegal, and that's not to be confused with semi-automatic, which is what most firearms are, handguns. But fully auto is patently, it's a federal crime. So it goes without saying that that's not something that we could possibly legislate.
Okay, then, thank you, Chair. I guess I wrote down something that Commissioner Berschauer said, which is that we will be the ones to determine which firearms regulations to enforce, but wouldn't that allow us to decide whether to enforce a ban or not ban on a fully automatic weapon? I'm just a little confused there.
No, that's not what we're saying. Just for instance, as if that's not what the ordinance is suggesting. The ordinance is simply suggesting that when the state legislature, when federal legislature makes rules regarding these types of restrictions, this is something that is already very clear, is that the only people who can own a fully automatic weapon is someone with a federal firearms license. And if you want to ask about whether or not we should determine what law, Christian, did you want to weigh in? Did I see you raising your hand earlier? No.
At some point, but please go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay. So if we want to determine what laws we decide that we're not going to enforce, this ordinance takes into account that there are more and more bills coming out of the state legislature, which are more and more restrictive, for instance, to people who have lawfully, they've gone through the process, they've gone background check, fingerprinted, paid the fine, pay the fee, and now they're being restricted in terms of where they can go. And I believe there are between 600 and 900 jurisdictions that could make the determination. For instance, where I live, there is a CPRD property not too far away. I live in an extremely rural area, which means I could not walk anywhere near another rural area carrying a concealed handgun, which is pretty much kind of hard to amount. So basically, the county could not necessarily enforce. But if you want to talk about that, the state of Oregon is a sanctuary state, which means that we have chosen as a state, or the state has chosen, not to enforce federal immigration law. For instance, in your particular business of growing and selling marijuana, that's not something that the federal government thinks too kindly of, because it's considered a federal crime. So we've made that determination in the state not to enforce certain laws, and people seem to be fine with that. What we're saying is that as a county, we are not going to allow for the further restrictions on Second Amendment rights. Commissioner.
Yes, so as a clarifying, thank you. Commissioner Berschauer said that we will be determining, if this passes, which laws which regulations to enforce and which regulations to forbid enforcement of within our jurisdiction. And so is it just you determine by majority of the board then? Because if a majority of the board says that we're not going to enforce things that are federal regulations, I'm not trying to use the fully automatic weapon as in any way inflammatory. It was just that it was referred, there were lots of references to non-automatic weapons. And so wouldn't it be the discretion of the Board of Commissioners then to determine, since that's what Commissioner Bershauer said, or is it all going forward? That's what I'm confused about.
We can't enforce anything. That's not up to the commissioners.
Exactly, but Commissioner Bershauer said determining which things the county, and I'm merely restating what Commissioner Bershauer said. And I would say Commissioner Bershauer, but I'm not the chair.
Chair, can I
Bersh-
respond?
Go ahead, Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Coolidge, I did say that because technically what this ordinance would do is put the discretion back to the local authority. So it would be put back to the sheriff as well as the Board of County Commissioners. The sheriff already has discretion. The sheriff can pull you over tomorrow and, if you, whatever, let's, name 5 crimes, right? You're guilty of all 5 crimes and you did them, but he has the discretion to say, I'm going to let you go, or I'm going to write you a citation and charge you with this. So he already has discretion. What this is saying is that we are going to, in essence, provide sanctuary from the ones that are targeting lawfully abiding citizens, and share the discretion between the legislative authority in the district as well as the sheriff. So technically, you could probably write legislative policy on the county level that describes exactly what the sheriff would like to see enforced and what he doesn't. But the overarching ordinance is to simply say that we are not nullifying or voiding any federal state laws. We are simply pulling back our authority to a local level.
I think I just want to make a clarification. I think there might have been some miscommunication that we would not be able to make that determination. What we're saying here is that basically we don't have that discretion because we have already preemptively said that we are prohibiting these types of restrictions. That's the whole point. So
Chair,
I think we're just, go ahead.
That's what the ordinance says. It does say that, but it doesn't preclude us from then going forward and legislating certain things with the input of the sheriff. But the ordinance itself says that, what you said.
Well, I think there might be a sort of a misunderstanding, and we're just sort of parsing words here, is that we make this by virtue of this ordinance, make it so that, for instance, future boards can't come in and say, like the city of McMinnville did not too long ago. City of McMinnville City Council voted to, which they have under the provisions of state preemption, to prohibit loaded open carry within the city of McMinnville. That's something within their purview. That's something they did, that they had the authority to do. What we're saying is that we are making the determination that should future boards come in and say, we're going to pass ordinances and we're going to do all kinds of things to restrict Second Amendment rights, well, we're saying that is not something that we would. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to, did you finish? Do you want to finish?
No,
Oh,
go ahead.
Okay. So this ordinance would prohibit future boards of commissioners from doing things? Is that what I heard? And Christian and I have actually talked about this in the past with other things. Is that something that we can do, Christian?
Well, any commissioner, any board can come in and undo anything. We're talking about that this is what this board chooses to do. Christian?
Oh, that's right. I mean, if this board chooses to adopt this ordinance or something similar to it, a future board could amend it or repeal it.
Okay, so then to clarify, Chair Sterrett just said that this is attempting to limit what future boards can do. So how do I reconcile that with what Christian just said?
So what we're saying is we're making an ordinance, and we know that any legislative body. So, for instance, the legislature could come in and we're watching that in Washington D.C. right now. So there could be some unilateral, because there's a change in the political makeup of a board or a legislature. That goes without saying. I mean, that's why we have representative government. So what we're saying is that this particular board is making this determination. Should the makeup of the board change, they could come in and say, and make any kind of ordinance. So for instance, if you look at the number of counties that have resolutions supporting the Second Amendment or ordinances, there are quite a number of them, and they've had Second Amendment ordinances since 2013. There's a large number of them. So it's not like this is, we're making this up. I mean, this is something that's been done for a number of years.
And I apologize, Chair. I must have just misheard you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. So Christian, to verify, if we approve the ordinance can be amended at any point in the future, and with either more specific language or less restrictive language, and a future commission could vote to just repeal the whole thing.
Yes.
And that is true whether or not the ordinance comes from a vote of the public or from a board of commissioners.
If it's been approved by the voters, then a future board would not simply be able to repeal that ordinance. It would have to go through a different process.
Okay, my understanding was that if it comes forward as a public vote, that the commission then has to almost like vote to accept it in some sort of order or ordinance.
Yeah, there is that process, and I believe that may be part of what Columbia County is now doing. Columbia County passed both its preservation ordinance and its sanctuary ordinance through votes of the citizens. My understanding is they're now going through a process to ratify or validate those ordinances. The problem that has come up when in other counties when that has happened is, and this sort of gets to some of the framework I want to make sure we're all within when we're having this conversation. Questions have been raised as to whether or not commissioners can ratify those ordinances if the ordinance says or does something that is contrary to current state law around preemption of the regulation of firearms. So that's covered under ORS 166.170, and that you all are aware of that statute. It expressly reserves the right to regulate firearms and firearms accessories and elements relating to firearms in the legislature, state legislature, except to the extent that they have specifically granted exceptions to that preemption to cities and counties and others. There are several ways in which that preemption has been taken away, and states and counties can act in certain limited capacities. But for that, the regulation of firearms is exclusively reserved to the state legislature. So if one of these citizen passed ordinances contains language that would be contrary to that preemptive statute, question is, can the board legally ratify that ordinance? That's one question. And we have a similar concern with the way this sanctuary ordinance is currently drafted. It would appear to me that this would also be contrary to current state preemption. We are going beyond simply saying we're going to select and work with the sheriff to decide which existing state or federal gun laws we're going to enforce. Under section 3 and 4 of this ordinance, it prohibits employees from enforcing those laws and goes so far as to say that those are null and void and of no effect in Yamhill County, which doesn't doesn't sound to me like we're retaining any discretion or giving the sheriff any discretion to decide whether or not they can still enforce state law. Now, this discussion has had a lot to do with concerns over pending legislation, and I appreciate the attempts to clarify that what we're most concerned about, or what I'm hearing the commissioners are most concerned about, is potential legislation that's moving through Salem or in Washington, and that we are not necessarily intending that this ordinance would invalidate or nullify any existing state or federal regulations around firearms. If that's accurate, then I think a later version of this ordinance should make that expressly clear, because I think that would resolve a number of the questions that have come up when I've been speaking with the sheriff. And that would get this ordinance closer to, I believe, complying with the current state of preemption under state law. For example, Senate Bill 554 would be another express action by the legislature where they have granted the authority to cities, counties, districts to regulate firearms in the manner described in the statute. So if, for example, we had an ordinance that was specifically targeted not at existing rules and regulations, but prospectively towards, legislation like 554, because 554 would only operate in a world where cities, counties, and districts now have the authority to act in this way. We wouldn't, if we were to pass an ordinance that says we are not going to enforce ordinances adopted by other cities or ports or districts under 554, we have a different set of issues that we would have to reconcile, but we wouldn't any longer be needing to worry about whether or not we're violating state law. The question would be whose ordinance would take priority in that instance, right? How would we reconcile what the city of McMinnville might do with what the county has done, or what a district within the county has done with the county ordinance? And the sheriff and I talked a little bit about this yesterday. I think Commissioner Bershauer, you mentioned what might happen if we have a city ordinance and it is a Class C felony, which could be a felony for which you're arrested and potentially housed in the jail. When I spoke with I was speaking with the city of McMinnville attorney for a different reason, but when we were talking, I asked her some questions about how they go about enforcing city ordinances now. Not all city ordinances are cited into circuit court. Many are cited into municipal court. However, some are cited into circuit court because municipal court is not a court of record. So given that this, as 554 is currently drafted, a violation of an ordinance, and I'm not quite sure how they get to a violation of a policy being a Class C felony, but that may be something to let the legislators and legislative council try and reconcile. At any rate, assuming it's an ordinance, there are certain, and she was going to get back to me on exactly which of the current city ordinances that are ordinances that address criminal matters are cited into circuit court, and whether or not, if the city were to do something under 554, if that would be the kind of ordinance that would be cited into circuit court or not. And then we do need to, or would need to, at that point, reconcile what would happen if it's a violation of a city ordinance and they're brought over to the jail and booked into the jail. Whose ordinance at that point would take precedent? And the sheriff did also mention that in the event that there was a judgment, they would need to comply with whatever the terms of the judgment were, regardless of whether or not we had a county ordinance that might say, no, we're not going to involve ourselves in those matters. So there's your analogy of a minefield or a patchwork is either of those are accurate, because this creates a lot of questions and issues that not only we, but every other county and city and district and port and what have you, everyone would need to try and reconcile. But so there's that impact in the event 554 becomes law, and that's what our sanctuary ordinance is targeted towards. But I do want to just remind everyone that the way this is currently drafted, I think it has some significant challenges in the sense that I believe it goes beyond simply exercising discretion to potentially violate the current state of preemption in Oregon by attempting at the county level to nullify existing state law. Creates a clear, to me, it's a clear violation of those preemption statutes. So if we are in agreement that this is meant to be prospective and going forward, then I think we can take steps to modify and clarify the language in the ordinance to do that.
I wanted to point out that, you know, we don't have the authority to make our own rules, laws. What we do have the authority, discretion, if you will, is to determine how we're going to spend money and how we're going to expend resources. And that's really what this is all about. And then to go back to, I think, Christian, you said something about Columbia County. Now, the Columbia County Commissioners, from what I understand, have not initiated any court validation actions. This is coming from staff. Is this correct?
No, I think it's something that would only happen with the approval of the board.
Okay, but who initiated this court validation discussion?
I don't know.
So it wasn't the commissioners then?
I don't know.
Okay, because my understanding is it hasn't been, the genesis of it was not with the commissioners, that it was perhaps generated from staff, which I think is important for us to note. But going back to what this really is all about is that Yamhill County has discretion on how we spend money. And every year budget time, we determine how much the sheriff is going to have and how much public works, well, that's not a good example because that's state money. But basically how much each department is going to get based on what their needs are. What we're saying is that we as a board and as a county are saying that we are not going to expend resources to enforce these laws. And I think that's important to
but it does, Commissioner, under Section 4, it does declare that these, and this is where it would apply to all existing laws as well. It does say that these laws are to be treated as if they are null and void and of no effect. So that is something beyond simply deciding, in my view, how to spend money. We don't need an ordinance to decide how the board is going to spend money to enforce certain laws or to take action in certain areas. This is, if I'm understanding it correctly, and if I'm reading it correctly, this is doing something above and beyond sort of helping make clear to citizens or staff how the county is going to spend money. It is saying that they shall not engage in these activities in the course and scope of their employment, and that these extraterritorial acts are null and void. And that, to me, I don't know how else you could say it. That to me appears that we are trying to act and enforce and regulate firearms in the county in a way that might be in conflict with state law. And that's part of why I think it's very good that we're having this conversation.
Null and void for spending money. Commissioner Bershauer.
Yeah, and if that's true, then we should clarify it to say that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I think Commissioner Kula had his hand up first.
Commissioner Kula.
It was a race. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Bershauer. Yes, right now it doesn't. Right now the language is very broad. It's not about the spending of money. It actually says enforce, and then it goes on to say these are all null and void. The one thing I wanted to bring our attention to is a slightly different part of it, which is that Section 5 says that any entity, person, official, agent, or employee of Yamhill County who knowingly violates this ordinance while acting under the color of any state or federal law shall be liable to the injured party. And that's one where, forgive me for saying it, it makes me uncomfortable that we would be putting something out into the public that says, hey, staff, you can get sued if you don't know exactly everything about this, especially because right now it is very broad, the previous section.
Thank you for that. I think that what we do on a regular basis, and I think that if you ask county council and our administrator just how many times the county's been sued, it's certainly not something that's unusual. So to say that we expect employees to know the scope of ordinances that are in their wheelhouse jurisdiction, if you will, I don't think is asking anything that we don't ask now. Christian.
So I actually think that what this does might be slightly different than that, because this is saying that no employee could, within the course and scope of their employment, enforce these state laws. So that if say a deputy attempted to enforce an existing state law, this ordinance would say that by doing that, you're acting by definition outside the course and scope of your employment. So I'm wondering if maybe the liability that Commissioner Kuhl is referring to is individual liability. When employees currently act within the course and scope of their employment, they're protected in taking those actions by the Oregon Tort Claims Act and our insurance through CIS to cover us for those kinds of claims. One concern is that the way this is worded now, those folks could be exposed to individual liability, which would not be subject to the Tort Claims Act and would not be subject to CIS coverage. And those folks would then be responsible for defending themselves for acting in what they may very well believe is their obligation under state law to enforce existing state law. And again, I want to point out that what 554 would do would possibly put us in a situation where we aren't talking about a violation of state law. It would be whether or not the county chooses to, and how the county and how it chooses to deal with ordinances adopted at the local level, because they've been given the express authority to do that by the legislature. So in a 554 situation, we would be dealing with a different set of questions than we are if we're talking about the enforcement of existing state law.
Thank you for that. I think those are, I'm making notes of things that I would like to look into and address. Those are good and valid points. Thank you for that, Christian. Commissioner Burschauer.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to state that we're really not putting law enforcement in any different of a position than they already are in when it comes to enforcing federal immigration laws, when it comes to enforcing the state's view on marijuana and now methamphetamines. It's against federal law to enforce those things. So how is it that we can pick and choose which issues are off the table? And at the same time, I just lost my train of thought.
If I could answer those first two, the two you just cited were state law actions, not local. I think if we were, for example, to try to adopt a local ordinance here that said marijuana is illegal within Yamhill County, we would run into the same preemption issues that we run into with the regulation of firearms, because that is an area where the state legislature has acted, and we would be in direct conflict with that law.
Right, but if somebody pulls me over for speeding and I also have a bunch of marijuana in the back seat, technically I'm guilty of a federal crime, am I not?
Under federal law, possession of marijuana is still a controlled substance, and yes, but again, I'm not sure that analogy. I'm not sure I'm following how that analogy would apply to the earlier statement that you made.
Well, but another example is if someone is pulled over and they are here illegally and they were speeding, they're essentially, law enforcement has been told that you are to stand down in enforcing federal immigration laws. So while it is technically a federal crime to be here illegally, that is not what law enforcement is doing. So And the other thought I had was that none of these Second Amendment sanctuary ordinances or resolutions across the state of Oregon have been challenged successfully legally. So I don't know, we're kind of running in circles when we're talking about what could potentially happen to Yamhill
Well,
County.
and I'm sorry, Commissioner, go ahead.
That was all. Thank you.
I don't know that they've been successfully challenged. Frankly, I don't know that they've been unsuccessfully challenged. I don't believe they've been challenged because I am not aware of any of the counties where these ordinances have actually been enforced or been followed in such a way that they could give rise to a challenge. So you're right, they haven't been successfully challenged, but I'm not sure they have been challenged at all. I'm not aware of that completely, but I at this moment am not aware of a example of where they have been challenged and been upheld or challenged and rejected.
I think it's important to say that we know as of now that these have not been challenged. So they have not been challenged. Some of them have been actually in effect since 2013, and there has not been a challenge. The other point I want to make is that when we make a decision, whether it's the federal laws versus state, so the state says we're pushing back on immigration or marijuana laws, what's the difference between that pushing back and the county pushing back to a state law?
So I haven't looked at the sanctuary laws. I haven't looked at the marijuana laws closely, but off the top of my head, if the federal government wanted to make an issue of this and wanted to challenge Oregon, for example, on the legalization of marijuana, I think they likely could. They've chosen not to do that. If they wanted to challenge the state on whether or not the state sanctuary law violated federal law, I don't have any reason to believe that they couldn't do that. Why they have chosen not to do that, I don't know. But I'm not sure how that kind of a conflict would resolve itself. We do have the supremacy clause. The supremacy clause under the federal constitution says federal law, where there's a conflict, will prevail over state law. We have similar preemption statutes when it comes at least to the regulation of firearms in Oregon, that where there is a conflict between a local regulation and a state law will prevail.
And we just see that on a more serious level in terms of, who's the bigger dog in the fight. We've got the federal government and we've got the state of Oregon, and the state of Oregon pushing back on two significant federal laws. And we still have managed to supersede that. The other thing I wanted to bring up is there is a law. The state of Oregon has a law that says that people who have their property tax foreclosed on, that the state requires that counties keep the equity and distribute the proceeds to the various taxing districts. And I had asked why we couldn't, as a county, give that money back to the former owners of the property. And then you responded that after much research that we are required by the state to collect that equity and to distribute to the taxing districts. Now there is a court case, and we're a party to that. Mm-hmm. And there is someone who has made I don't know is the term class action, but it's a lawsuit that names all 36 counties. And we have been doing that. We've been taking money from people. And that is, I think there are only 5 states that do that, instead of just taking the taxes owed. Mm-hmm. So I use that as an example to say that here we are, and we're being challenged on that. So
yeah, and that's exactly right. And depending on the outcome of that case, the current statutory scheme in Oregon around property tax foreclosure will either be upheld or struck down. And the courts are the appropriate place for those issues to be decided. We might face a similar challenge if we were to pass this ordinance, and then that challenge would appropriately be resolved by the court. If the current statutory scheme around property tax foreclosure is upheld, well, then we would be obliged to continue to follow state law, just as we are obliged to follow state law when it comes to the regulation of firearms.
think we have 16, I don't know, just ballpark, we have 16 roughly counties that have such an ordinance enacted. A couple of counties, Lane and Tillamook, are actually circulating a Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance, and we've not seen a challenge to one. So to say that we could face a challenge is also to, I think that should be taken into consideration. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. So back to Christian's comment to the first observation that it hasn't been challenged. Christian, you noted that as far as you understood, what was it, that no county has attempted to enforce this in ways.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was that just
aware.
like, yeah.
I'm not aware of a situation where, for example, assuming they've adopted language that is worded like ours is, that they have run into a situation where if the sheriff continues to believe that it's their sworn duty to enforce state law, if they continue to go out and enforce existing state law, that the county has somehow chosen to, under the ordinance, cite those officers for violating the county ordinance. I don't know that that's happened, but that, again, and I spoke with the sheriff yesterday late afternoon, and he did confirm that that is still one of his primary concerns with the way that the ordinance is currently drafted, is that it could potentially put them in the situation of one deputy going out and enforcing state law, and then another deputy or some other enforcement arm of the county going out and citing that same deputy for violating the county ordinance. So as it's currently drafted, that concern in my mind remains.
I don't think this restricts anything. Anyway, go ahead, Commissioner Bershow.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a conversation with the sheriff as well, and there are parts of the ordinance that he requested clarification on. So my purpose in opening up this discussion today is really for just that, the purpose of discussion, and going through and discussing whether or not there's certain parts of this that need to be revisited. So that's certainly something that I'm open to. I did ask about discretion, and he not only has discretion himself, but his deputies also have discretion. Mm-hmm. So the example that he gave was like Senate Bill 941, when that passed, they have exercised discretion around that before. Mm-hmm. So technically, are you violating state law? Probably, but is anybody, suing over it? No. And there are parts, and he brought up the fact that that there are explicit consequences, if you will, to violating the ordinance, which, frankly, I don't think the ordinance would be complete if you're saying that you're prohibiting an action and then there's no consequence for violating the action. It's just part of the ordinance.
Yeah.
It is also my understanding that the commissioners or the governing body would maintain discretion over if a county employee was found in violation of the ordinance, whether or not it would be pursued. It's my understanding that we have discretion over whether or not that would even be pursued, and we would hold someone accountable. So I just wanted to make those points clear.
I mean, I guess what I'm still questioning and asking myself is, under Section 4 penalties, these extraterritorial acts shall not be enforced by Yamhill County agents, employees, or officers. So that, to me, is a prohibition on the officer's ability to exercise their discretion. The ordinance says that these extraterritorial acts shall not be enforced. So that's one area where I'm still struggling with discretion, because I absolutely agree they have discretion, and I would go so far as to say that they're likely not I don't believe they would be violating the law in the exercise of that discretion to decide which crime or which offense to charge or to cite someone with in the ordinary course of their work.
And then, Chair, if I might, a couple of things. Probably since the DA, the district attorney, Brad Berry, is also, his work is also affected by this. It probably would be good to hear from him as well, or at least I would like to hear from him.
Yeah.
The other thing is that Commissioner Bershauer said that the county commissioners would retain discretion about whether to declare somebody in violation of this who's a county employee. But around now, Section 5 is actually with regard, the only thing I see about, well, maybe, so this is a separate thing, is that people in the community who feel like their rights under this ordinance are violated by a county agent, that there's no discretion there. They just get to, they get to sue personally.
I think that we've seen in the past, we have had discipline actions. The sheriff has disciplined staff and deputies, and they have come before the board as part of a resolution to a grievance. In other words, there's a process. And so we upheld, in this one particular case, we upheld the sheriff's discipline of a deputy that was then reversed during a future process through a union action. But I just wanted to remind, I think you were there, Commissioner Kula, for that when we had, were you there for that? No, maybe that was before you. Yeah,
I know what you're talking about, though.
It was a case where we had to make a decision on upholding the sheriff's disciplinary action. So, well, maybe what we can do is, since this is just an initial discussion, I've written down a couple of issues I would like to look into and to address, and perhaps we can ask for sure to have the sheriff join us next week. I know he was unable to join us this time, to have the sheriff here because we've been talking about him behind his back, and have him there, have the district attorney and anybody else that we think, well, I think let's just leave it there. Christian?
Commissioner Bershauer had her hand up first.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. My impression from this process and observing other counties is that it's almost like a two-step process where the sanctuary ordinance sort of resets the playing field. And then by virtue of the ordinance, you then have a situation where, yes, all extraterritorial acts in terms of gun restrictions or legislation in general are not to be enforced, but it doesn't preclude us from establishing our own rules, for lack of a better term. It may be that those other counties haven't taken that next step. I don't know. But clearly, in the case of like Columbia County, the sheriff is still doing his job. His deputies are still doing their job. Are they performing background checks on CHL applicants? I'm sure they are. I don't know. We can confirm with him, but I'm sure they are. So there is a sort of next step after we maybe reset the playing field isn't the best term, but when we draw a line around the county and say, okay, we are not going to enforce extraterritorial acts. However, we are going to work with our sheriff to determine what it looks like, what enforcement actually looks like. I don't know if any county has done that next step. That would be worth looking into.
Thank you. Christian?
And again, I think it's very important to keep in mind too, when we're having that discussion or thinking about how we might implement an ordinance like this, are we only talking about future new gun laws? Or are we also talking about not enforcing existing state and federal gun laws? And I thought I heard, I'm not sure which, several of you I think have said things along the lines that this is essentially or primarily wanting to focus on prospective new legislation. And I think we could deal with much of the the concern that remains around the legality and enforceability of this ordinance by making it very clear that this is not intending to invalidate or to say that existing laws cannot be enforced, but it would only apply to new laws. Now, I'm not saying that by doing that we have avoided all future potential concerns around preemption that still exist. But for example, for laws like 554, where the legislature is making an exception to the preemption and granting some additional authority to local entities, our ordinance might very well be effective and more enforceable in those situations. I still think we would have concerns or we would have questions that would need to be asked about a future state law. For example, if the state law says we are now going to regulate firearms in a manner that we haven't regulated them before, they wouldn't be giving local jurisdictions authority to regulate, but they would say we've now decided we're going to step into this new regulatory area as it relates to firearms and firearms accessories. We would still, and our ordinance would still have the potential conflict with that new state law, but it might give us some room to operate in other areas like 554, where it's not the state implementing a new law, it's the state giving local jurisdictions some authority to act.
Thank you for that. All right, so are we clear that at this point what we want to do is do what we do really well here, and that's just kick that can down the road for yet another week?
I would say I would agree that I think it would be helpful to have the district attorney, because the district attorney is one of those unique offices where he is an agent of the state in his prosecutorial capacity, as are his DDAs when they're prosecuting cases. But those DDAs are county employees, and he also has administrative staff within his office that are county employees. The other office that is similar, I don't know if it would make sense to include them at this point, would be Ken. I'm kind of looking at you for DCJ. They're another law enforcement agency that has both officers and administrative staff, where there could be some potential for conflict going forward. But I'm just putting that out there.
Thank you. So, all right, let's do that then. If that's agreeable, we can plan on meeting back here next week and addressing some of these, answering some of these questions, and maybe getting a little more clarity. I really look forward to the sheriff being here. I think it's a great idea to have our district attorney here, and then maybe give us a chance to talk to some of these other counties and see what their experience has been. I'd like to know a little bit of how that all came to be. So Commissioner Berschauer, I know that this is something that you have proposed. So any final thoughts on what you'd like us to do in terms of next week, getting ready for that?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm fine with that. I think if we want to continue the discussion next week, the sheriff did indicate that he would make himself available. So, and then also DA Berry, if we want to bring him in too. I think that's great. And I would also appreciate a little bit more time to research Columbia County and some of the other ones as well, to see how they've navigated some of these issues. So.
And I will hopefully have a chance to chat with their county council between now and next week as well, to see if I can get an update from her on where they are in that process.
That would be great. I want to thank, I know that county council and our administrator has spent some significant time just discussing this, and appreciate that. And also, commissioners, I appreciate your discussion on this, and also everybody who submitted public comment took the time to let us know what their concerns were. I made note of some of those, and I think a lot of them were brought up today. So thank you all for that. And
with a kicking the can down the road, I actually get to read all the comments now.
Yes, and there are a lot of them. So anyway, and also staff. So Carrie and Carolina, this has been quite a burden to deal with the public comments, but we appreciate the fact that they have come in. Did you want to say something, Commissioner Kula?
Well, Christian had started speaking.
Nothing? Okay. Alrighty, so I don't see that, let's see, we've got that. Public hearings, we have none, and I'm going to assume that we can hold our comments. I've got Northwest Seniors in about 7 minutes, so I need to be on that call. And Christian wanted to give us an update on soccer, but unfortunately, I see I see that I'm looking at the clock here and our time is short. So thank you, Christian. Maybe we can address that next week. You keep that handy.
And
I'm available at the discretion of the board, always.
Chair, what I might do, since we've put off announcements a couple weeks, is I might just send a quick update from my areas of liaison responsibilities to Ken and Carrie and Carolina so they can forward it on to you.
And also, I've got a bunch too. Maybe we can, I'd really like to have if you can you wait till next week so we can do those? Because I think what's missing a lot of times is we don't get to tell other commissioners what we're doing and what has been done. And there's a lot. And sometimes you can't put an email. So if you're okay waiting, I'd like to hear from everybody on what's been going on. There's been a lot. So thank you for that. And so at this time, I'll go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. Thank you all for the discussion. And